If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is in the lift lobby and down the stairs. Officers will direct you to the assembly point in Shortlands Road. We'll make a quick start. Item number 1, apologies for absence. No apologies have been received. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from committee members? No. Okay. Item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting on the 1st of February 2023. Can we agree these as an accurate record of the meeting? Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Very swift, very quick. Item number 4, policing in Hammersmith and Fulham following the Casey review. We now begin. Can I make an introduction and then we can?
Well, I mean, I'd just like to put down a marker before you do that, if I may, and I mentioned to you beforehand that I would do so.
Yeah, please.
I understand a number of organisations have received a letter in advance of this meeting. I have not seen the final version of that letter. I also understand that my Labour colleagues had a meeting yesterday to discuss the format of this meeting and how it was going to run. I obviously wasn't present at that. So unfortunately, I've not been included in any of the preparation for this meeting. I'm equally in the dark as everybody else as to what we're doing here. Fortunately, I was at Superintendent Craig Knight's fantastic talk at Fulham Boys School, which Councillor Harvey and Coleman attended. So I am familiar with the subject matter, but I just want to put down a marker that I don't think it's appropriate to organise meetings like that. And in future, I'd like to be included in any formal correspondence that goes out on behalf of this committee. If that'd be possible. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning. I apologize for not including you. Of course, my colleagues asked for a briefing, which I was happy to give to them. In terms of the meeting, I think it was back in March that the leader sent out the e-news, which said that we will be having this meeting. We'll be discussing the Met review, the case review, and all about that. I do take your point. I apologize. I'll make sure to send you a briefing in the future, but you haven't missed out on anything. Don't worry about it. Right, if we can make a start. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. Thank you to the police and the community organizations, residents, and all my councillor colleagues. This is a very important meeting for our community. Of course, the trigger for this meeting was nothing else than the publication of the case review into the Metropolitan Police back in March 2023. Of course, you will recall the main headlines that came from the report. It found the Met Police to be institutionally homophobic, misogynistic, racist, and riddled with widespread bullying and discrimination. The review made it clear that the Met as an institution is sadly dysfunctional, badly resourced, lacks accountability and transparency, and has lost the trust of Londoners, the very people it's asked to serve. The most vulnerable communities, women, children, ethnic minorities, the disabled, have been let down and left behind. Sadly, the report makes for grim reading. But as soon as the review was published in March, we made a decision as an administration to take action and to organize a meeting, which could, develop into a series of meetings that would bring together the local authority, the local Met Police, the community, organizations, businesses, residents, anyone who wants to have a say on this. And the reasons for this decision were essentially threefold. We will not be having this meeting, of course, it needs to be said, first and foremost, if we did not believe that there is still hope for the Metropolitan Police, if we do not believe that it is worth fighting for. We all recognize, of course, the important role that the Met Police have in keeping Londoners safe. And we recognize, we even celebrate the many great officers who go above and beyond their work. We have them in the room, they run towards danger and they protect us from it. We've all worked closely with exemplary police officers. We know them in our community, in police work panels, in our daily work, daily life. And we're encouraged by the commitment, including by Superintendent Craig Knight and his colleagues, to take on board the review's findings. We believe it is worth fighting for, a better Met Police, and we'll work with them to develop the plan to bring about necessary change. But of course, on a second point, we would also not be having this meeting if it wasn't for the worrying findings of the case review, which found, for example, that it has the Metropolitan Police has a history of playing down the failings, a culture of denial, and avoiding taking action. The case review is sadly not the first to call for urgent change in the police. This hasn't always happened. It is incumbent on all of us to work with the Met Police and make sure that the review's recommendations are acted upon. And there is simply no other alternative, given the review's devastating conclusions. And it is important, moving to the third point, that this happens publicly and openly. As a council, we are committed, of course, to the responsibility to work closely with the Met Police. We have done so forever to reduce crime and keep prisons safe. It's why we fund Britain's most extensive CCTV network and share it with the police, why we have funded the 72 law enforcement officers who support the police, and why we keep supporting and funding services like the Gang Violence and Exploitation Unit, which work very closely with the police to protect young people. And of course, we're also committed to making residents part of the decision-making process and to involve them in all our activities. It's now upon us, an important role as a local authority to bring together the police, the community organizations, residents, businesses, anyone who believes in a better metropolitan police, to discuss the review, discuss its findings, the local implications, and to do that in an open, transparent, conversational way. We need to be clear, this is residents' meeting and community organizations' meeting. We will be making sure that you are leading the conversation. We are merely here to facilitate it. Recommendation 12 of the case review proposed that the introduction of borough-based structures to ensure Londoners' voices are heard and to allow for greater transparency and challenge must be essential. Of course, we're here, we're happy to answer the call, and we'll lead this endeavor for as long as necessary, ensuring both proper scrutiny of the police and that residents' voices are heard. And of course, depending on tonight's meeting, as I said, we may have more meetings taking place, a report will be produced. The goal is to provide a comprehensive local response to the case review. And as far as I know, we're one of the only, if not the only borough doing that. So, tonight's running order. First, we'll hear from representatives of the local Metropolitan Police. We have with us Detective Chief Inspector Anne Linton, Superintendent Craig Knight, and Detective Chief Inspector Scott Ware, who will be presenting the response to the review, as I understand, and they'll be taking questions from the panel of councillors. Thank you, all three, for coming. And we'll then proceed to hear from residents, representatives of community organizations. As Councillor Dinsmore said, invitations have been extended in my name and on behalf of the committee, inviting a number of organizations who work with women, young people, LGBT community, ethnic minorities, and we're very grateful for your attendance here today. As we'll discuss later, some organizations have submitted written responses. You will all have a chance to give your evidence, tell us about your experience working with the police, ask questions to the police, to us, give your suggestions for improvement. As I said again, this is your meeting. We are here as facilitators, but you're the ones taking the reins. As it will be a busy meeting with a lot of contributors, I would appreciate if those wishing to speak will wait for me to call on you. And because we need to keep it to a specific time, please don't be offended if I ask you to stick to strict time limits. Please make sure you always give your name and any other relevant title when speaking. And I will also be making a more specific introduction, including what the invitation contained later on after the police part of the meeting. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Superintendent Craig Knight to start us off.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invite. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and it's important that we are, because we are here to effectively listen to the responses from all of you and to make a truly different Metropolitan Police moving forward. If I may, I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, some around the context of the Metropolitan Police, leading into how we got to the Casey report and our response to that, and then just some minor specifics about some of the things that are happening as a result of that report. So let me start first of all by talking about the Metropolitan Police. We are a large organisation. We have over 45,000 employees. We have a budget of around £4 billion a year, and we are operating against a very, very complex, diverse, and incredibly exciting city backdrop. Probably the most diverse and exciting city on the planet. And that makes policing both exciting and very, very complex in its nature. The frontline policing is done through 12 basic command units. Those 12 basic command units exist across London, and each basic command unit has a number of boroughs within it. Looking at our BCU, the one that I'm part of and my colleagues are part of, And we have 3 boroughs within that: Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea, and Hammersmith and Fulham. Those 3 boroughs for frontline policing have 2,056 people currently within it. And across the 12 BCUs, obviously that's replicated, roughly speaking, around 2,000 officers per BCU. Now, let's put that into comparison to other forces. Bedfordshire Police, as a police service, has 1,400 police officers. So this BCU has more police officers than Bedfordshire Police. So we have a lot of police officers. We are policing, without doubt, one of the most complex parts of London, and that brings with it some very unique challenges. The BCU and the Basic Command Unit has 5 strands of activity, and every one of these BCUs across London has these 5 strands. And it's important that you understand sort of the context of how we police. Those 5 strands are response policing, investigations, public protection, headquarters, and neighbourhood policing, which is the bit of the business that I'm responsible for. And the BCU excludes the vast array of specialist functions and services that exist across London in the wider context of the Metropolitan Police, whether that's counter-terrorism, custody, human resources, the HR teams, the sort of support functions, tactical support groups, firearms, marine unit. They are all separate functions. So the BCU frontline service delivery is very much dedicated to service delivery for response policing when you dial 999, to localized investigations within Hammersmith and Fulham and within the wider BCU, and to policing across those 3 boroughs. And that's important, I think, that you understand that, so that when you ring 999, you know that you are getting a response that is effectively localized. The response team for Hammersmith and Fulham are based in Hammersmith and Fulham. The neighbourhood team are based here. There is a dedicated detective function here in Hammersmith and Fulham, albeit they might investigate crime elsewhere, depending on the complexity. They are based here. Hammersmith Police Station is just round the corner. So we are local police officers delivering a local service. When you dial 999 to report a crime or you report an incident, it's dealt with in a number of ways, depending on the severity of the incident. If it's not serious enough to warrant an immediate attendance, you may get a telephone call, you may get an officer by appointment, or you may simply report the matter online and get a localized neighbourhood officer telephone you. But that doesn't mean that we don't and we mustn't take things seriously. We must take the crimes and the incidents that you report seriously. And our role, my role within neighbourhood policing, is to ensure that we have a response that is local, a response that responds to the communities, and a response that ensures that localized problem solving is just that. It is local. It is meaningful to the people in that community at a very micro level, whether that's an estate, whether that's a particular ward, or whether that's across Hammersmith and Fulham. My role as the neighbourhood superintendent is to deliver a service to you as Hammersmith and Fulham. The Casey report, as we know, came about as a result of a number of significant incidents and significant scandals involving police officers and the policing community, not just in London, but more widely as well across the UK. And it was commissioned by the then Commissioner of the Police in London. So it was an internally focused and internally commissioned document that we said from the outset we would allow to be a sort of public-facing document. And that's important because this didn't come about as a result of the government or anybody else saying you must have an audit. This came about as a result of the Commissioner and more widely MOPAC and others saying we need to do something now. This is serious. And it is. And I would stress from this point onwards, and effectively the Commissioner has already stressed this, that the 16 recommendations within the Casey report have been accepted in full by the Commissioner and the Metropolitan Police. In full. And I'll stress that again in a moment. The Casey report considered standards of behaviour, culture, and contained 370 pages, 10 chapters, 120,000 words. And it is stark and horrible reading. And I and the many good police officers that submitted views on that report agree that we as an organization have to make fundamental change, and we have to do so now because we are broken. And the commissioner has accepted that. And the commissioner in January, as part of the final part really of his 100-day plan, introduced something called the turnaround plan, which wasn't a specific response to Casey, but it was a response to the desperate needs of the organization to change. That turnaround plan was then consulted upon, and Councillor Dinsmore mentioned the event that took place in January, February around that. And we listened to 10,000 different community groups and 10,000 responses, and then submitted just a few weeks ago, which was effectively launched in the last 10 days, a response. And that response isn't simply to the Casey review. It's a response to the needs of the wider organisation and the 670 odd recommendations that have been made about policing and the Metropolitan Police in the last couple of years that the Metropolitan Police are struggling to comprehend and to get behind. And we've identified 10 themes within that document. And that document is the new Met for London plan. If you haven't seen it, it's online. If you go to the Met Police website, there is a link directly to it. There is a summary document, which is 2 pages, and the full document, which I think from memory is 81. It is genuinely worth a read because it talks about how the Metropolitan Police are going to spend £534 million in the next 2 years to fundamentally begin to change this organisation in the way it needs to change. The Casey report talked about a number of things, and whilst there are 16 key recommendations, they're effectively themed into a number of areas. The impact of austerity, vetting, recruitment and standards, the challenging demographics and the changing nature of London, the changing demands on the organisation, increasing violence against women and girls offences, reducing trust and confidence, which for me is probably the biggest one that the Casey report talks about. And that all came about as a result of a series of very high profile deaths, Sarah Everard and others, and incidents across the Met and more widely across policing, which resonate with all of us. In different ways, they resonate with all of us. But I haven't met a police officer that doesn't want to change and isn't ready for this change. And let's not forget that the Casey report, the vast majority of that document is an internally faced document talking to officers and the responses to the issues that we face internally as well as externally. So in January, obviously, we had the new senior command team, new commissioner, new deputy, and that turnaround plan had those 10,000 interactions across London and consideration of the wider recommendations that existed. And that led to the new Met for London plan, which I've just mentioned. In that plan, there are 3 priorities for reform. Community crime fighting, and that's localized delivery of community crime fighting. Cultural change, and fixing our foundations. Now, whilst those are nice headlines, underneath that, within community crime fighting, is a delivery plan that focuses on London's priorities, on localized priorities, for all of the Met to rebuild trust in policing by consent. The policing by consent, if you're not aware of it, I'm happy to talk about it later, but it is fundamentally, it sits at the heart of British policing and it is being lost by the issues that we have faced in the last 4 or 5 years. The second part of that plan is the cultural change. That extends to standards, vetting, improved timeliness in complaint investigation, campaigning for reform in procedures, whether that's rooting out officers for wrongdoing and doing so as quickly and as timely a fashion as we possibly can. And the Commissioner is campaigning very loudly at a national level for significant reform with the Police Federation, with government and others, to change police regulations to allow us to remove people who are not fit for service as a police officer as quickly as fundamentally possible. That needs to be done with a process, and it needs to be done fairly and in accordance with law. We also need to fix the fundamentals of our organisation, whether that's paying conditions, whether that's equipment, training, but also reviews of processes. Those processes can be anything from recruitment processes to stop and search. Let me, if I may, now come on to some of the things that have happened so far, some of the things which I think are successes, but they are the first step. The plan talks about how we're investing that £534 million. Page 78 onwards, I think, is the budget allocation, and roughly speaking, how we're spending it. There are 500 additional serious sexual assault perpetrators that have been charged in the last 12 months compared to the previous 12 months. We are now targeting, and Anne can talk about this in some detail, the top 100 violence against women and girls suspects in a way that we have never done before, in a way that is similar to terrorism investigations, focusing all of our efforts across the organisation on those perpetrators who cause most harm to women and girls. Antisocial behaviour is down across London by 10%. You'll be pleased to know it's down by 10.34% in Hammersmith and Fulham. Burglary across London is down by 6.3%. In Hammersmith and Fulham, it's down by 16%. Calls to 111 and 909 are being answered faster than last year, and we're working on getting that timeliness down. So when you call us for help, we are there as quickly as we possibly can be, and we answer your call and deal with it as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But we have some challenges. The Commissioner talks about a budget deficit in London, which is down in real terms by 28% since 2010. He talks about how officers per thousand population remain less than they were some years ago because of the increases in the population happening at a faster rate than our increases in police officer numbers. And he'll talk to you about the issues around recruitment and retention. There's been a very public debate about police pay. We've had a 7% pay rise, which is market leading for the public services. But in real terms, police officers have had a 17% pay cut since austerity began. And police officers are going to food banks. Let's be very clear about this. There are police stations in this country with food banks in them. Police officers are struggling as much as anybody else because we are members of society like everybody else. The increase, of 7% is also not entirely centrally funded. The central funding equates to just over 2%, I believe, from central budgets, which means that in order to fund the remaining pay increase, organisations across the country may have to make cuts in policing in other areas to pay for the police officer pay increase. And we have to bear that in mind. But fundamentally, the new Met for London plan is designed to put Londoners and communities first in everything that we do. And my promise to you, moving forward, is I will do everything in my power to make sure that happens for Hammersmith and Fulham. So the K2 report headlines are that every one of the 16 recommendations have been accepted. We are trying to better protect women and girls. We are trying to reinvest and reprioritise frontline policing. We are trying to end discrimination in all of its forms. We are trying to improve standards, and we are trying to improve leadership and accountability in the service. That is not going to happen overnight. It is going to take time. The 2-year plan is the first step to that. Cultural change does not happen overnight. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes commitment of everybody, including communities. And let's not forget that fundamentally, police officers are locally appointed and local people delivering local services. Finally, from my perspective, I just wanted to introduce my two guest colleagues who are experts in their respective fields to give you a context of some of the things you might want to talk about this evening. Anne Linton, Detective Chief Inspector responsible for public protection. And I'll ask her in a moment to, if you're happy, Chair, just to introduce herself and her role. And Detective Chief Inspector Scott Ware, who is predominantly looking at proactive crime investigation, which is a really important piece of work around the most prolific offenders and those that are causing us the most harm in our communities. So I will stop talking at that point, Chair, and hand over to you yourself. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll be happy for the two detective chief inspectors to introduce themselves, if you want to do that now, or.
So good evening, Chair. Good evening, members of the community. My name is Scott Ware and I'm a Detective Chief Inspector. I returned from specialist policing last year voluntarily to engage closer with the communities, and it's been a real pleasure seeing some of the great interactive work that takes place here, which is quite unique when compared to other colleagues around London with the integrated gangs approach, which I'm more than happy to talk about in slightly more detail a bit later or answer any questions. I think for me personally, I volunteered to come to support Craig. I'm really passionate about each of the commitments. I guess for me, within local investigations in old money, criminal investigation department, CID, it's quite silent on what we're doing. But for me, we're part of frontline policing, and the confidence and trust for me will come from the public feeling that they're engaged in the problem solving. I like to use the term whole system approach. I had the luxury of working with the mayor 5 years ago, helping to set up the violence reduction unit. People in the audience might be interested to know that the most violent areas in London recorded in Victorian times are exactly the same as they are today. And they obviously produce a lot of the people that are using violence on the streets. I'm really passionate, and I've done quite a bit since I've been here to just bring together that kind of whole system approach and actually sort of expose myself to some of the community charities being funded by the councils. I think for me, it's context. And I think if I was a resident of Hammersmith, Fulham, and I said some of these headlines, which I've just wrote down here, I'd say, wow, I never knew that. I don't think you ever will, because the press are not really interested in good news, and it's bad news that sells, which is a real shame, and obviously is a little bit demoralizing for my officers. I was with them yesterday morning at 3 a.m, so I might look a bit jaded. But over the last year since I've arrived, we've recovered 8 viable firearms off the streets of our BCU. We've recovered nearly £1 million of cash, which is of criminal assets, and that's where we hit criminals hard. We've arrested over 80 people for very serious youth offences, youth violence offences, which has obviously had a real impact on the people that those individuals were exploiting. I'm sure there are some very stark headlines with the integrated gangs team, with the work that we've done to divert so many people away from their criminality. And I'm really happy to be here to answer any of your questions. I think for me, we have work to do. I still don't think we've got it with regards to how we leverage and we implement the kind of tectonic plates, the statutory partners, and actually the community to say, if I do my part and we enforce an error and we arrest the people and we see it day in, day out. Yesterday, we arrested 9 individuals. Society doesn't work like that. Drugs is a supply and demand culture. So I feel we sometimes just create a vacuum and actually other people will step into those voids. So there is work to be done. I'm really a supporter, maybe not the terminology of the clear, hold, build strategy, which people may or may not have heard of, but in simple terms, when we do our bit, the council and the statutory partners should do their bit, and then actually the community, we would ask and implore them to do their bit. I'm meeting with various charities, mainly from Westminster, which is obviously occupying a lot of my time. And it's really important that the mums, the bereaved mums, the faith groups, the leaders, that when we say we're going to do something, that we empower them to actually know about these things and actually then to do something to prevent their own sons and daughters becoming the next victims of crime. So really pleased to be here, real privilege. And I guess the message for me is that we do have some amazing officers that do amazing things day in, day out. I spent an hour and a half on the phone to the media on Sunday in preparation for a Times article about watch robberies. That's a big issue for not just here, but Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea. And the article just almost read something that was, if you need help, then go to the flying squad, and didn't mention anything around some of the key headlines that we want the public to just engage and work with us on. So I'm real pleased to be here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Detective Chief Inspector Linton.
It helps if I put the speaker on, doesn't it? I'll start again. Good evening, Chair, all online and in the room. So I'm DCI Anne Linton. I've been in the Met for 29 years. I have spent 25 years within the public protection remit, both on the reactive, proactive in specialised crime. It's an area I'm really passionate around. One of the reasons I put myself forward to come and work on this BCU was having recently led on a peer review across Jigsaw, which is the management of sex offenders. I was able to put a number of recommendations in place into how we manage our sex offenders and how we can improve our processes. And on the back of that, there were all the Jigsaw teams across the BCUs were put in line and put under the guidance of public protection, whereas previously they were split between the CID and the public protection teams. On top of that, they ended up ensuring that there was another DCI posted across the BCUs to enable that sex offenders management and all the rest of the ongoing sort of proactive operations and the safeguarding of victims and the targeting of suspects could be managed correctly within that DCI space. So in terms of public protection, it really helps to actually explain what is within that role. So within public protection, we have the CSU, the community safety units, which are the domestic abuse teams. We have the Sapphire teams, which are the rape specialised teams. We have the child protection teams. We have the child sexual exploitation teams. We have the predatory offender units, which are also moved in line with the Jigsaw teams to try and find those high harm offenders and manage those high harm offenders. We have the missing persons teams, and we have the indecent images of children's team. So you can see it's a really high risk area to work in. As I said, I'm really passionate around working in that area and that field. In line with what's happened within public protection and in line with the recent turnaround plan and the new Met for London, public protection has had a real review and a real look at how we're managing that space. So as I said, we have those new DCI posts, of which I'm one of them. We have Jigsaw that is aligned under public protection now. We are also putting back to the BCUs 565 trained specialists to strengthen our local public protection services. They are actually coming into the community safety teams, the rape teams, the child sexual exploitation teams, the child protection teams, the Jigsaw teams, and we are also putting them into a stalking unit. At the moment, we have a number of officers that have just moved into our community safety unit to bolster those number on our resources. So that assists us with looking at our high harm offenders. We also have a VORG, violence against women and girls. I have a remit in terms of looking at the intelligence picture that sits across our nighttime economies, our open spaces. So we bring all of our concerning nominals through our VORG intelligence unit to try and work out who we're going to be targeting. On top of that, we have the 100 VORG nominals that have been identified, which we are all looking at and have just recently been rolled out. We recognise that the majority of violence against women and girls is committed by a small number of men in society. And the Met has used the data insight to build a picture of the 100 men and a small number of women, because sometimes women are involved as well, who have in the recent past committed or have been alleged to have committed serious violence against women and girls in London. This new tactic is one of a number we are testing to target those we believe pose a risk of harm to women and girls. It doesn't mean other areas stop, because we also carry on with the rest of the work that we've got. But in terms of targeting those VORG offenders, it's a bit more of a holistic approach now. So we have specialist teams involved with looking at the targeting. So we're doing it in a couple of different ways. So we're obviously targeting to try and ensure those offenders are taken through the criminal justice system, any court orders are put in place, but more importantly as well, to safeguard future victims, to safeguard victims at the moment, and also safeguard their families. And that's also taken through our MARIC, so our multi-agency risk assessment teams that come along to our DA work. I sit on MAPA, which is the multi-agency public protection arrangements, which looks at the high harm violent offenders and the registered sex offenders within the BCU, which obviously includes Hammersmith and Fulham. So we are very much working with our community. In terms of the child sexual exploitation teams, there's a current review going on to look at that, because we identified that there are also children that sit within the criminal exploitation. We have just put together on the BCU a new operation called Operation Persan, And that is looking at exploited children that are coming into the UK, already in the UK, that may be targeted by teams that are using them to commit thefts. And I am already speaking to our teams on our MACE panels, which is the multi-agency child exploitation teams, of which AW is I believe the only borough across London where we have Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster all working together. That's been highlighted, and Hammersmith and Fulham have provided me with a lot of data recently, which I'm exploring and looking at. This is all quite new. I only joined this borough in April, so there's a lot of work to be done. So excuse me if I started off a bit slow trying to pull it all together, because I'm still trying to find my feet in terms of how the BCU and how Hammersmith and Fulham work. But essentially, there's a lot of good work and partnership work across the borough, and also in terms of within the police, because in terms of targeting these nominals, if we are looking at sexual offences as an example that sit outside of rapes but are still I would say lower end of sexual offences, but they're still serious. They usually sit within either our CID teams or they sit within our local frontline policing teams. So we are ensuring that they are coming through the VOG intelligence meetings, so that we have a wraparound around our specialisms, and that we have our briefings out, particularly within the nighttime economy. And that's not just within Westminster, that's in Hammersmith and Fulham, so that all our officers and our partners that are out and about can identify that. If I give you a couple of good news stories, unfortunately it isn't Hammersmith and Fulham, but I want to explain what we're doing because we're rolling it out into Hammersmith and Fulham as well. So last weekend, we had the relaunch of the nighttime economy, working with Operation Rana and working with Operation Vigilant. And this is to try and target those VOG offenders that target the nighttime economy and the licensing economy. And Operation Rana is related to spiking of drinks. So essentially, as part of this operation, which we rolled out on Friday, which started in Westminster, we had our volunteers, we had our MSC, so our local specials, out with our NPT and our ERPT teams, and I had my predatory offender unit assisting with briefings, and we went to 40 different venues to make sure that we put posters up around Operation Rana and drink spiking awareness. Previously, when I was at CE, Central East, a few years ago, I was involved in something that was called Operation Rasan, and that dealt with the nighttime economy as well. And it looked at us, Angela, and we put some wave training in place across the business safer teams and across the licensing teams, and that training is still there. So although that started in Westminster, there are plans afoot, and I'm sure Mr. Knight will go through what the sum of all plans are, but this is the beginning of it, and I'm very energised because I think there's a load more work we can be done in that area.
Great, thank you, and welcome. April was only 3 months ago, and what a task you have ahead of you, all three of you. And again, thank you for coming and presenting. I will now open the floor to questions, starting with the members of the panel. I have a lot of questions myself. If I may give a steer to my colleagues, my questions will be focusing on, the benefit of having the three officers here is that they are local and they can give us information on not just a case review, but what we'll be doing, what has been done locally, Hammersmith and Fulham, and what will be done locally. And that's what we want to find out, what's will be happening when. So if you want to also focus your question along these lines, I think it will benefit us, it will benefit the public. Any questions from my colleagues? Councillor Dinsmore.
If I may just begin with two thank yous. The first is, as many people in this room will know, I was a victim of one of the watch robberies that you mentioned earlier last year. And I'd just like to thank the police for their incredible response time, both on the day and then following up. I was pleased to say that they did catch both of the people who mugged me, and they're now in prison. So I'd just like to lay down a personal thank you. The second thank you is Superintendent Craig Knight and his team for the appetite for change and the passion for change and determination to change that I've seen at all the various meetings that I've attended at Fulham Boys School, here in this committee on the 21st of March. And I can really see that coming through. So thank you to you and your team for that. I have a number of parts to my question. The first is whether or not Superintendent Knight, you were surprised at the last meeting when the chairman stated that the reason the council had stopped funding the police is because they thought that they were homophobic, misogynistic and racist and that they weren't getting value for money, given that that was before the Casey report came out. The second aspect to that question is whether or not you think those sort of comments are helpful. And the third aspect is whether or not that makes your life easier or more difficult in terms of working with the community and serving the community. Thank you.
Superintendent, just a point. Of course, you'll have the chance to answer. Councillor Dinsmore, I think, obviously, you know, you're entitled to say whatever you want, but you may have misunderstood, and it's maybe because I didn't give you a briefing. I apologize if that's the case. The tone of the meeting. We are here to work with residents and the community to understand how the police can improve as an institution and how we can help them and how residents can fit into that. We are not really here to, you know, score political points. And, you know, I don't think residents are here to hear about what the Labour Party says and what the Conservative Party says. I think it's doing them a bit of a disservice if we do that. But of course, Superintendent, if you want to make your point. Also, you know, at no point did I say that we stopped funding because the police were homophobic or racist.
It's 38 minutes into the video you can find online on the 21st of March, 2023.
Okay, I may have misspoken. You'll also find in the video that the case report was released that day. So it wasn't released. That was the day it was released.
Sorry, yeah, the case report was released that day, but you said the reason you stopped funding the LET almost a year before was because the Met Police was racist, misogynistic and sexist, and you felt, quote, you weren't getting value for money. Given that we are here to discuss those sort of findings and given that was the motivation that you stated at the time, I'm just curious as to whether or not that's helpful, whether or not the Met Police were surprised by that and whether or not that makes their life more or less difficult.
We've discussed many times together with the superintendent at the full council why we've been funding the LETs, but I think the leader of the council, Stephen Cowan, wants to come in.
Yeah. Look, can I just, first of all, thank Superintendent Knight and the police officers that come into this meeting. This meeting is a meeting to look at policing in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. Clearly, it follows on from the Casey report. Superintendent Knight has given a full explanation of the Casey report, as we heard. The relationship between the council and the police is two sides of the same coin. It's a very close working relationship that we have with the police, and there are four aspects to it. We have the largest CCTV operation in Britain. Almost everybody who gets prosecuted and sent to jail is because they've been seen on our CCTV. That's cost us in the last 9 years a considerable investment to maintain and to extend, and we are still extending it. It's the reason why we will catch criminals with the help of our excellent professional police. The second point is we have set up, it was my idea to set it up, a gangs unit. And that was because many young people are being press ganged into gangs that are better organized with WhatsApp, electric scooters, a variety of different technology that allows them to be more organized and better than ever before. And that's why within its first 4 months of operation, when it took out 600 gangs members, it wasn't just in Hammersmith and Fulham, it was fundamental to taking them out across England and Wales. That's what we're up against in crime. The next thing we have is a law enforcement team. As the Met Commissioner has said, that has faced cuts because the police have faced tremendous austerity cuts. Those austerity cuts have meant that there are food banks in police stations, that there are not enough police, and there are certainly not enough police to reassure and to collect evidence on the ground. It is for the council to allocate a law enforcement team and to have total control. I know the Conservative opposition campaigned against it. I just simply think they're wrong to have done that. The law enforcement team are a key part of the ingredients for tackling crime, along with the gangs unit and the CCTV. And the final part is to have a very cohesive and professional relationship with the Metropolitan Police Force. That's what we've done. It is incumbent on all us in democratic public life to examine any challenge. The police are critical friends to us and we to them, but we are friends first and foremost and partners in an endeavour to cut and reduce crime and catch criminals. And that, as anybody knows, is about sometimes the causes of crime. It's about dealing with and preempting that, which is a lot of what the gangs unit is doing, and other factors we put into place. But it's also about catching criminals and stopping them endangering other people. That's the nature of this. But when some things go wrong, and the Casey report, as the police officer said, was largely police officers talking about their experience as police officers. It was an internal document. It is our duty as a community, when policing is based by consent in this country, it's one of the great things that makes Britain great. It is our duty as a democratic forum to work to wrap our arms around the police and help them, because my experience, the 25 years I've been in public life, is that police officers run into danger. They don't run away. When any of us, there's been a challenge in this community and we've got onto the police, it is the police who sort it out. Now, they have some challenges and they're detailed in the Casey report. So we need to work with the police to help them with it, to help them engage our community, to help them learn, and to carry out a huge cultural and change program as the Commissioner has laid out. That's what this meeting's about. I would say to the new councillor who's just raised the party political points, this is not the forum to do that. We have a full council where those debates can happen. I appreciate its political knockabout, but if we're to live up to what our residents want us to do, and I know what they want us to do, there must be some political consensus around that. They want us to cut crime, cut the fear of crime, tackle the causes of crime, and to build a society where people are safe to go about their business without fear of anybody. The police are the front line in that fight, as are our law enforcement officers. And that's why there has never been any criticism of the police from us. Certainly, the money we spent on the law enforcement officers, we had previously 48 police officers which we funded. The fact is, those police officers were allocated largely to Westminster once we merged with BCU. Every police commissioner I talked to told me that was very hard to manage because of the internal bureaucratic structures. So we were paying Hammersmith and Fulham taxpayers' money on police officers, and we're finding sometimes that they'd been pulled off into Westminster or KNC, and we had no control over it. And it was quite evident often talking to the borough commander, they didn't either. And there were classic examples which I won't recite. We have used that money and put more money into having 72 law enforcement officers, so significantly more than we had of the 48 police officers. That's the nature of it. Now, I don't know any member of the public who's against us putting law enforcement officers on the street. Only people I hear doing that are some of the voices of the sort of newer, more councillors still learning the ropes is the only good interpretation I can put on it, because it's quite honestly not the time and place to make politics. What I would suggest is there's people in this room who share our desire to work with the police to make this a better, stronger community. And I would strongly urge everybody on the committee to ask questions and raise issues, and with the members of the public, that are going to help deliver that. Because there is a real fight out there, criminality and terrorism. Let's not forget we had a terrorist attack in Parsons Green only a few years ago, are worse than they've ever been before. Now, I was down on Parsons Green all that day. I saw firsthand how the police behaved and heard the briefings from them, which were extremely professional. I think they even told Donald Trump to put out when he attacked our police in the United States. Our job is to work with them, to look at the crime, and I would strongly urge everybody on this panel to do what the best select committees do: question, examine the evidence, learn and advise, and do that in the spirit of cooperation.
Thank you, Councillor. Superintendent, you're of course welcome to answer the question or any of the remarks by the council leader.
Thank you. One of the benefits of being a police officer for the last many years is that I'm completely non-political. So from my perspective, this is all about value for money. And you're absolutely right that policing or funding police officers means that the police officer has a particular role and can be abstracted to do other things. And one of the challenges when organisations fund police officers is making sure that that value for money is there. There was a decision made, which is perfectly within everybody's responsibility to make, to stop funding police officers and to fund let officers. They do a slightly different job. However, they are a valuable contribution to the local authority, to the community, as a visible presence in that community. They bring valuable intelligence, they bring valuable local accountability. And certainly I welcome those. And I think that the value of the gangs unit and CCTV is well publicised. What I would also say, however, in relation to the wider point, is that the whole purpose of the new Met for London plan is to improve frontline policing and to do things differently with communities. And that absolutely is valid. And it is right to criticise the police right now. It is right to have an open mind as to the need for us to be utterly transparent in our organisation and to say it how it is. So we as a police service are not frightened of criticism in any way, shape or form when it is deserved. I think that we are beginning to improve. There is a lot to be done. We are recruiting very hard for additional PCSOs. You will have seen, I hope, across London, the PCSO advertisements. Across London, that will look like 500 additional PCSOs. The Commissioner has promised 300 more police officers to local policing. Sadly, not all of them in Hammersmith and Fulham, much as I'd like that. And we are looking to engage communities differently and listen to communities differently. The start of that process is tomorrow. At White City Community Centre at 6 p.m. I, along with an Assistant Commissioner, the Chief Superintendent, will be there talking to the public. If you wish to attend, any of you or anybody online, please feel free to do so. If you go onto the Hammersmith and Fulham Police Twitter site, the Eventbrite link is there. You can register a ticket and join me and have that conversation. We'll be asking communities to respond to the new Met for London plan and to start to deliver local policing in Hammersmith and Fulham differently. So I think for me, the answer is in the making, but we are some distance in that conversation, or some distance forward in that conversation, with a long way to go.
Thank you, Superintendent. Just if my colleagues are allowed to ask a question myself, you mentioned that we're recruiting very hard for PCSOs, and you gave a figure, I think 5,000 across London. Is there a figure for Hammersmith and Fulham or for the Central West BCU that you can share with us?
I can't share that data at the moment because I don't know. So it's 500 we're recruiting at the moment. The target that the Metropolitan Police have aspired to over the next 3 years, depending on funding, is a further 1,600. So 1,600 in total, 500 in the next 12 months. In terms of where they will go, there is a piece of work that's being commissioned now based on data across London to identify where those PCSOs will be allocated. It is fair to say that Hammersmith and Fulham will benefit. Of that much I can be certain. And the Commissioner in the plan has promised that the 21 wards in Hammersmith and Fulham will each have 2 PCs and a PCSO as a minimum. And obviously that differs slightly from where we are at the moment because of the political boundary changes that took place in May 2021. Meant that we didn't have the funding at the time to put those additional officers in place. So that is an uplift of PCs and PCSOs that Hammersmith and Fulham will benefit from the outset.
And is there a timeline about when that may be happening, or is it an ongoing process?
It's very much an ongoing process. As soon as we can recruit people, we will obviously get those people trained. I think the first people will probably start to hit the ground in terms of the streets and communities probably around October. But that will be a trickle process through the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Councillor Miri.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here as well, and to members of the public. Just before I ask my question, I'd just like to make an observation about Councillor Dinsmore's comments that it wasn't the publication of the report and when it may have been published, or the date of the publication, that made the police institutionally racist and institutionally sexist and institutionally homophobic. The review was a response to pre-existing issues that were well recognised and well observed. So the date of the publication is not the thing that made the police institutionally racist and sexist and homophobic. That's just an observation. A question for Superintendent Craig Knight. You mentioned in your opening remarks that this was a result of many high-profile incidents that we're all obviously aware of, but I think it's also very important to recognize that it's many, many daily incidents as well that members of the community may have faced, many anecdotal stories that we've all heard of mistreatment, racism, sexism, misogyny that stretch back decades. So that's another point of observation that I'd like to make. And you also mentioned that the new Met for London plan is designed to improve policing and to improve performance. And of course, that's very important. Presumably, it's also to make the police an anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic institution. And that brings me to my question, which is you mentioned that you spoke about the localized structures. So a sort of sense of devolution, local services and local people being recruited, the 999 centers being local. And of course, that's a good thing. Does the localized service also provide you with a degree of devolved powers? So the last time you were at this meeting, it was around the time the review was published. And I think you mentioned you do have some devolved powers over training and recruitment. But in light of the review having been published and the new Met for London plan, will you receive additional devolved powers? And I ask that obviously because we're a local council and it's pertinent to what we do locally to know. Do you have local powers to enact the findings of the report and the new Met for London plan? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a complex question in the sort of devolution of both accountability and responsibility. So as a neighbourhood superintendent, I'm responsible effectively for trust and confidence in the community. I'm responsible for problem solving and neighbourhood policing. As a wider basic command unit, I have wider responsibilities across that basic command unit. So public space violence against women and girls, stop and search, various other areas of business. Within that, I have budgets and accountability for some form of commissioning in some aspects. There are also mandated training courses that obviously come from both the Metropolitan Police mandated and also College of Policing, HMIC, FRS recommendations and others that outline training that we have to undertake. And on top of that is the operational training that we have to undertake to effectively reaccredit with any specialist skills that we may have, be that public order, firearms, carrying of taser, that kind of thing. So the commissioning of training and commissioning of some of the changes that we're talking about, I don't have direct responsibility for. I do have a say as one of 32 borough superintendents, and I sit on a wider sort of Met-wide groups for those particular areas of business. But my colleagues, obviously, in the wider senior leadership team, in the same way that you run an organisation like Hammersmith and Fulham, we are responsible for a number of bits of business, and each of us have different management responsibilities within it and different commissioning responsibilities within it. I don't know whether my colleagues wish to add anything on that.
I mean, I could mention a little bit of local training. So in my world, obviously that safeguarding space across domestic abuse, across child abuse, etc. I know that the local councillors and the local partners have training in place, and we're sending people on those local training together. So for example, in the child exploitation teams, I know that some training has come out recently, just don't have those dates. We're very keen in getting people involved. So because I work in such a specialised area, and actually I did previously work in training school as well, I'm very keen at ensuring all my officers are not just up to date with their police training, but also they're linked into things like court orders, to stalking orders, to preventions, to SHOPOs, which basically stops monitoring sex offenders, so sexual harm prevention orders. So it's working with our partners to see what we can put in place to stop that, closure orders, etc. So in terms of that kind of training, we can look at what my team actually do as part of the day-to-day work, how they not only manage suspects, how they support victims, and how our local partners, including yourselves, support victims in the training you give. At my last MACE meeting, which was my first one actually, we do it quarterly, which was last week, and we talked about the training schedules, and the partners were bringing in some of the training they're putting together, and I'm linking it into the training that my team have to make sure it fits and is fit for purpose and they're involved. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Just to, I guess, from a sort of reactive and proactive perspective, there's lots and lots of specialist capabilities that are going to be sort of opened up. I guess like a lot of these things, it's in headline form at the moment, but I'm definitely seeing through coming from that sort of specialisms that there's definitely more and more pressure being put on a lot of specialist capabilities to say, what are you doing to support frontline policing? And I'm involved in some conversations at the moment, part of the proactive review, which is part of the plan, to say, what's that equity look like with regards to what certain specialist units do. And there's a performance meeting that took place today where out of that, the flying squad, one of the specialist capabilities that I'm sure a lot of people have seen movies about and read in the papers, that they're going to be helping me and my officers with some of the issues that we're dealing with on the BCU, and undoubtedly that would benefit each of the three boroughs that form our BCU, and obviously Mr. Dinsmore as a victim of a watch robbery, which is obviously quite unfortunately this time of year. It's a seasonal crime. We try our very best. We've had a lot of operational successes, and we work with the specialist units, but there's definitely now an organizational kind of understanding that maybe risk comes in the volume as much as the kind of threat, harm, opportunity risk, which is how we task our assets. And clearly we're part of a BCU that has the eyes of the world on us. And I definitely think, if I am honest, in my 26 years, that message seems to have landed. The penny's definitely dropped. And I guess there'll be a lot of officers that when they're promoted have to return to frontline policing. Some decisions that are going to be made that obviously internally will be probably quite tough for certain colleagues to take, but I think it's absolutely necessary, because if we get this bit wrong for the communities, then that's really ultimately where we lose that confidence and trust. And I welcome that decision to bring a lot of that specialist capability and that experience back to, you know, the likes of my unit. So I would say watch this space. That's definitely happening, and hopefully when we come to the next one, we'll have some tangible results about how many people that actually entails.
Yeah, if I may. Thank you. Thank you very much. So just specifically on the sort of findings of the review with regards to institutional cultural problems, correct me if I'm wrong. So Superintendent Knight, you mentioned that the commissioning of the training is done on a top level basis. But what I understand from Detective Chief Inspector Linton is that we have scope to go further locally. So we can't influence the sort of fundamental training, but we can go further, or you can go further working with local partners.
Yeah, that's correct. And also just to mention, so I don't know if people have discussed the WAVE training. So essentially we're linked into the business safer groups and looking at the WAVE training, what we deliver to our business groups and licensing. So as an example, Operation Make Safe, where we ensure that young children aren't being exploited and taken into hotels. So although that's linked in to our partners, we're able to go in and look at our training and ensure they get not only the support from us, but so the evidence gathering. So example with Ask for Angela, if you have a sexual offence within a nightclub, it's ensuring that not only is the potential victim in there safeguarded in that, but we keep the CCTV. We make sure we don't give her a drink at that stage if we believe it's to be spiking, so we don't lose the evidence. We ensure they're put in a safe place. So I know I was involved a few years ago with putting that training in place, and that was agreed essentially across the Met, and that's been rolled out, and we're continuing to do that. So there are areas that we can link in with the partners to make sure that you get the support and you provide us with the support, so we're able to do that.
Can I just ask DCI, where you mentioned that hopefully by the time of the next meeting, you'll have some tangible results that you'll be able to present to us. Can I just firm this up a bit and make sure that, well, not that hopefully you will have results, but definitely that at the next meeting, you're able to give us some information on this, an update on what has been achieved or not achieved, because even the absence of tangible results is in itself worth noting. Would you be happy for us to have that on the minutes, just so we can follow up at the next meeting?
I've made my first error at my first meeting of giving myself an action, so more than happy to take that away. And I think it's quite exciting as well, because having worked in frontline policing here, and I joined in 1997 at Hammersmith, Fulham, so it's a real personal privilege to be back here, hopefully influencing things for the community for the better. I guess like a lot of process, we say we would like these people to move. There are then posting panels, etc. So more than happy to come, even if that is that these are the people that are going to be landing, and these are the operations that have been supported by the flying squad, one of which happy to share. So there's a number of offences across the VCU around people purporting to be police officers. I guess the risk that they pose in themselves, they're not violent offences, they are preying on our tourists that visit, and clearly that's an organisational risk, it's a reputational risk, people purporting to be police officers given the events of the last few years. I'm really pleased that obviously a specialist unit such as the flying squad are going to be supporting us on that. And I'm sure that's just an example of the kind of direction of travel. So hopefully come back, and more than happy to provide those details.
Perfect. Thank you. I think it would benefit all of us. And yeah, if you don't mind us giving you that action. Councillor Mir, I think you have a follow-up.
Thank you. Yeah, just before we move on, I just want to be really, really clear on this. So what I'm talking about is training of individual police officers, not in relation to potential victims or members of the public, but with regards to anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-homophobia. So internal training processes is what I'm talking about. And I noticed that in the New Met for London plan, there is mention of training under the culture change heading. So presumably that's to do with those issues that I mentioned, but there aren't any specifics. And I know obviously it's just been released relatively recently, but have you had any indication as to what that training might look like? Will it be the same sort of process? So top level commissioning of that kind of training, and then scope for additional local training? So I just want to know, what's the scope that you have locally to go further, if that's what the partners and local authority want you to do and what the community want you to do?
Okay, so the commissioning, particularly of sort of the national infrastructure, obviously the race action plan just been reinvigorated. Again, that's available online. College of Policing have got that, and that's being rolled out across the country. And that's a really important document in terms of every police source, including the Metropolitan Police. And the document itself, the New Met for London plan, talks about the Commissioner and everybody's responsibility and promise, and I absolutely share this, to make us an organisation that does not discriminate in any way against anybody. We are doing a number of things, whether it's recruitment policies, whether it's training to try and resolve that. It is a slow process. The training that we offer is predominantly regional, so it's sort of London specific, if you like, and that's largely done at Hendon or through specific training courses and something called NCELT, which is a computerized system for our training systems that allows officers to do online training. We do supplement that locally, so we do particularly around sort of new recruits, but for others as well that need it, we do sort of local cultural awareness training across the multicultural society that we exist within. And we bring in individuals from those communities to talk to and respond to local officers to sort of give them that awareness of how to interact. We're also looking at technological solutions. So there is a piece of software that I'm aware of which is being considered at the moment, which allows me as a police officer to use a power app, an app on my phone, my work mobile phone, that says I'm going to a house where they are Sikhs, for example. And it gives me a drop-down list of 10 things that I need to be aware of in attending that call and responding to it as effectively as possible. We have an inexperienced workforce, particularly our frontline workforce, and that's becoming even more inexperienced as the challenges of recruitment and retention play out. Around 60% of our frontline staff on many occasions have less than 2 years service. And certainly at the moment, that's a significant challenge for us. So anything that we can do, including the use of technology to support that and to bring about that cultural awareness, we will do. We're also utilising training that's been tried out with the College of Policing, and it's been rolled out as national best practice, which is around internal advocacy of challenge. So it talks about upstanders in society, and it talks about internal upstanders. Individuals at any rank can do this training. I've just commissioned some training actually this week for some of my staff to go and do it. And that is training that's delivered nationally for them to come back and be able and be empowered to challenge inappropriate behaviour from wherever it stems within the organisation. So that training is ongoing. That training is being rolled out across London, and I've just commissioned that for some of my officers locally.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Councillor Emma Apthorpe, who is the lead member for Women and Girls? She's joining remotely and she has a question for the panel.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation as well. I have a couple of questions, but I wanted to start just with something small mentioned in the opening introductions. Superintendent Craig Knight, you mentioned, or I believe if I heard you correctly, you said you haven't met a police officer who isn't ready for change or who doesn't want change. I say with the most respect that that is perhaps something that's part of the problem with the Met Police. There sadly will be police officers who don't want change. Sadly, it's very likely there might be police officers within H&F who perhaps won't welcome with open arms all the necessary changes. Perhaps, for example, who don't believe they need significant hours of training on how misogyny and racism operate. Is that something you're willing to accept? That's my first question. Thank you.
The simple answer to that is yes. You're absolutely right. There will be in any organisation, and we're an organisation of 45,000 individuals who are naysayers and saboteurs to change. Those people shouldn't be police officers. It is, or members of staff. If they cannot accept that we must do everything we can to be anti-racist, anti-discriminatory in everything that we do in all of our practices, they don't deserve to work for our organisation. My point was that genuinely, the vast majority of the people that I speak to day in, day out, have read the Casey report and agree with it, have read initially the turnaround plan and now the new Met for London plan, and have said, there's more to do, there's detail to add, but we're up for this. And I think fundamentally, we as an organisation accept that we have to do more, we have to change, and we have to do it now, or we will effectively die as an organisation. And we cannot in this country go to a situation when we no longer police by consent. Because if you look at countries that have policing systems that do not police by consent, they are not a country I want to be part of. And I'm sure most people in society do not want to be part of that. This is so important. And if you look at any change in any organisation, I'm sure you're aware there's a Kubler-Ross model of change, and the dark night of the soul that is that sort of, oh my goodness, we have to change. And everybody starts to think we can't do this, or I'm not prepared to do it because it's different. We have to. We don't have a choice. The Commissioner has agreed with everything that the Casey review has said, the 16 recommendations. And this is for me, being frank, it's a no-brainer. But you're right. There are individuals in this organisation who will be resistant to it. They will either come with us and change, or we will remove them from the organisation.
Councillor Apthorpe, your second question.
Yes, thank you. I'm very reassured by the clarification. I also wanted, since we're on the topic of training and wave training, earlier very recently, I attended an event which was aimed at discussing ways in which local businesses could support the end of violence against women and girls. And at this event, a presentation was given by 2 female police officers, actually. I just mentioned that just to acknowledge the fact that representation doesn't always equal culture change. Within that presentation, which was intended to be about how businesses could support their employees or customers, I was in fact told that I should remove my jewelry when walking home, to pretend to be on the phone if I thought I was being followed, but to be aware if I pretended to be on my phone may be taken, but also to appear confident when walking home and to memorize my route home. I obviously left feeling a little distressed. So I was hoping you could take this moment to talk about, firstly, some of the ways local businesses could help the cause, and also talk a little bit about how victim blaming is being eradicated locally within H&F policing. Thank you.
Can I first say that I would like to link in with you or be advised of where that training was, so I can actually look at that training. I have to say I am a female, and if I was going to be given some of that advice, I would be quite astounded by it as well. Some safety advice has obviously got to be given out, and in terms of routes home and keep an eye, because I would do that as well as a matter of course, think about, or how am I going to get home at the end of the night? But I think some of that, yes, does need looking into. In terms of the wave training through businesses, I know you're talking about for in the open spaces in the nighttime economy. What I actually want to bring back into that, and I'm going to start reviewing again, is where I mentioned Operation Make Safe, and that was linked at younger like children under 18s. I also wanted to bring that Ask for Angela through the businesses as well. And we looked at something called Ask for Annie as well, which is somewhere safe for domestic abuse victims to go and report. So I think there's a lot more that can be done in businesses. And this is something that I previously did at CE about 3 years ago. So I would really like to invite you to contact me or give me some direction so that I can have a look at that wave training, review it and see if we can update it and make it more fit for purpose.
Thank you. Councillor Apthorpe, if you have a follow-up.
Yes, and just on the topic of victim blaming and how that's being tackled within H&F, I'd be grateful for an answer on that as well. Thank you.
I suppose the victim blaming probably comes along in that same guise in terms of, I suppose we've got the 565 trained specialists that are coming into public protection. And when we talk about victim blaming, it does sit across that bulk space as well as that rape and sapphire space and that domestic abuse space. So that goes hand in hand in joint training with our partners to get the message out that we shouldn't be doing that. And that also fits in with a lot of the recommendations that have come across the investigation of serious and sexual crimes in terms of how we look at the evidence and how we present to the CPS. And it's an ongoing area that we're upskilling our staff in terms of that training space. As was mentioned before, we have a lot of brand new officers within the BCUs. I actually led on the direct entry detective training path that is now implemented across universities and across the Met to try and bring some of that training in place around investigations and around victim safeguarding and care. So I think all we can continue to do is get that training out and ensure that victim blaming isn't there. And if you actually can advise anything in terms of training that you've attended or any specific incidents, then I'd please ask you to link in with myself so I can review that and speak to the officers involved.
Can I just ask on this? Is this, very welcome offer for Councillor Apthorpe to follow up with you and to suggesting to you, is this something that is open to, any woman in Hammersmith and Fulham or
Of course, it's any, if there are concerns online or anybody that listened to this call, please contact us, because we need to be looking at how we're safeguarding women across the BCU and particularly in Hammersmith and Fulham being on this arena today.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent, you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment on that point around victim blaming. Let's be really clear that victim blaming is repeat victimization against women. And we must do everything we can to stop that, of course. I, as some of you will know, worked with the National FORG programme under Detective Chief Constable Maggie Blythe for a year. One of the things that we were looking at national level was how we reduced repeat victimization, victim blaming, not just within policing, but across the wider criminal justice network. And it's really important that we do that in a systematic and effective way. So things like advocacy schemes for victims, things like improved training for police officers, things like a genuinely perpetrator-focused response to victimization against women and girls, rather than repeat victimization of the victim. And part of that starts with the trust that we have to have in victim stories. And we must believe people when they come to us, and we must do something about their stories and their victimization and their crimes and allegations. And we must treat all of those very seriously. And I've been talking to a number of people across the country about how we do that. And I know that the Commissioner is as committed to that process as I and my colleagues are.
Thank you, Superintendent. In 9 minutes, we'll be moving on to hear from the public. Apologies for the delay. So my colleagues can ask questions until then, if they can be brief, and if the answers can be, of course, detailed, but brief. Questions from colleagues on the panel? Councillor Dinsmore?
Thanks. A very brief question. Given the additional 500 police community support officers you mentioned, do you know yet, or have you spoken to the council yet about the interaction between those PCSOs and the LETs, who clearly play quite similar roles? And is there a reduced need for LETs in light of that huge additional support that's coming in?
I certainly don't think there's a reduced need. I think far from it. I think anything we can do to improve the uniformed guardianship in our community is a good thing. I think historically, a number of uniformed guardians have been removed from society, be that bus conductors, train guards, whatever they may be. They act as uniformed guardians in our society. PCSOs are part of that process. The LET is part of that process. And anything we can do to maintain and improve that, I think is a benefit to Hammersmith and Fulham.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any further questions? Councillor Harvey?
Hi. Just following on from Councillor Apfort's questions around victim blaming and women. I wanted to say that in 2019, I was a victim where someone flashed at me on the tube. And when I reported it, absolutely nothing happened. And I was quite terrified on my way to work. Since then, on several occasions over the last few years, I've been stalked walking down the street, sexually harassed. I have not had the fortunate response that Councillor Dinsmore, you've had of reporting it and something happening. And I have not had the confidence in the police to actually report it, having reported the flashing and nothing was done, to then report the stalking and harassment and people coming up and shouting in my face as a single lone woman out and about. So really, what can we do? What can you do in the borough so that women do feel confident to come and ask for help and then get that help? I don't want any other woman to have to walk around the local Tesco's being followed and having a man try and rub up against them. I wouldn't like to see another woman walking alone down the Thames path and having a man rushing up behind her. And then when she stops to see what on earth's going on, he just stands there and then continues to do that to her and then other women, and not have the confidence to believe she could report it and anything happen. You know, it's quite serious, these things. How do you get the message out to women in the borough that they should be confident to be able to report these things and that action will be taken?
I think in terms of the messaging, I think I will refer back to Mr. Knight in a minute, because there's a whole load of plans that are being put in place across the BCU in terms of summer void plans and past the summer and how we do that, which links into, I didn't go into too much depth about nighttime economy last weekend, but it was also safer streets. So it's up Rana, it's up Ask for Angela, so it's getting all that advertisement out and it's ensuring that any victims are able to contact us. In terms of how we're actually dealing with those offences now, I can only tell you over the last 3 months since I have been in this new role. So in terms of the Borg Intel, so it's very tactical in terms of updating you, but part of my briefings that I hold on a 2-weekly basis are looking at just those type of offences. So where we have our specialist rape teams that obviously unfortunately have to go and deal with penetration offences, but go straight into that specialist remit. A lot of the offences you're discussing will come across and be dealt with at the moment by frontline policing and by the Safer Neighbourhoods team. So what I'm doing at the moment as part of my Borg intelligence meeting on a 2-weekly basis is that I'm calling everybody from the SNT teams, from the local investigation teams, from the response teams that attend our Borg intelligence package and my public protection teams. And we're actually reviewing all those crimes that are reported, and we're actually putting a plan in place to make sure that they're dealt with correctly, victims are contacted, any serious linked crimes that we're dealing with. But there's a real robust plan in place in terms of how we're managing those at the moment in times. I think the messaging that you mentioned is 100% something that we need to get out there. Operation Vigilant restarted as part of that nighttime economy. As I said, it was Westminster, it needs to come to Hammersmith and Fulham. And that's where officers have been trained when they're out and about in the nighttime economy. And we know it doesn't always happen in the nighttime economy, it can happen in open spaces. But that's where they're being trained to recognise when they're out and about potential targets for sexual offences so that they can be dealt with by the police on that time. I'm also asking for intelligence reports to come to me. So where a crime report might not have been put in place, but officers have seen something or been told something, they're put on something we call a crimin, which we're able to look at so we can identify whether those offences are happening. So there is a lot more work that is being done to identify that, because we know, and unfortunately I worked actually not on Hammersmith and Fulham, but I worked on Westminster back in the 90s, so 98 for 5 years, and I was on Clubs and Vice. So I dealt with all those kind of sex offences that was happening at that moment in time. The Met has had a real rejiggle since that time, and a lot of our units have moved, but we're going back into some of that training we're putting in place, and I'm very keen to get some of my teams back into that specialist field. I don't know if that helps you with your question, or if there's anything else you want to mention.
I would mention that the incidents that I've just referred to were all during the day, not at night time. So they weren't linked to nighttime economy. It was linked to men and the behaviour they think is acceptable to get away with, and the fact that nothing ever gets done about it. And I'm sure, I'm just one woman, I'm not a young girl. I've heard examples of a schoolgirl walking home from school being followed all the way from school to her home, being terrified. There's so many examples. I think so many people in this room of all ages could give examples. It happens during the day as well as the nighttime. And we do have quite a lot of them that have been raped in this borough as well, in public spaces. And I think, you know, we can sit here and quibble about whether or not we should be funding the LEP, but there's a lot of serious issues going on here, and I think we need to take it seriously and have a clear message that other women in the borough, and men, because it will happen to them too, but that they actually are able and confident to report it and see action be taken. That's really, for me, the most important thing.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I mentioned the nighttime economy just to give you an example of what's been happening, and that, like, one of the first operations. But part of that Vulg Intel also looks at the open spaces, and we give our officers briefings around where the hotspots are, where offences are happening, and then we link them into suspects. So that's also being done at the moment in time. And there are a couple of operations that are being put together through the summer that I'll defer back to Mr. Knight, which looks at the open space bit. On top of that, we are linked into schools, and we are putting some guidance in place across the schools and across the police, so that all the different areas, not just in public protection, understand what they need to do for that first response, so we get it right at the very beginning.
Thank you. If we may move on, just so we can get a kind of question from Councillor Campbell-Simon before moving on to the questions from the public.
Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight, Superintendent and Chief Inspectors. Sorry to move that up in here. My question, I have a couple, but my first question sort of comes on a segment from the Casey report, which states that public confidence in the Met to do a good job locally has fallen from the high points of 70% in 2016 and 17 to a low of 45 in March 2022. And people from Black and ethnic minority groups have lower trust and confidence in the Met, scoring 10 to 20% lower than average, and on trust, 5 to 10% lower on confidence. And also declining scores amongst white Londoners mean that the gap is closing. Now, although not in Hammersmith and Fulham, thankfully, do you think the Met's job to regain public trust has been damaged further by the recent video seen on social media of a Black mother being handcuffed in front of her young son on suspicion of fare evasion, which has since been confirmed that no fare evasion took place and she had in fact paid for her fare? Now, I'm not asking you to comment on specifics of the case, and the Met have since released a statement to the public on what their version of events of what's happened on that day is. My question is more based to trust in general when incidents like these happen.
So in relation to that, anything that occurs in almost any community, frankly, anywhere on the planet at the moment, that impacts on trust and confidence will impact on trust and confidence locally. It will. Obviously you will have seen in the news the response to that. We have referred it to the Independent Office for Police Complaints, who will undertake an investigation. So I can't talk about that specific case. But I absolutely accept that we have a great deal of work to do to rebuild the trust and confidence of communities across London. It talks about, and the Commissioner acknowledges, how some communities are over-policed and under-protected. And we have to recognise that, embrace the need to change quickly, and do something about that quickly, because any community that feels that the police are not there for them, we are not protecting them properly. So any incident anywhere in London, anywhere in the country that impacts on that, and there are many, is obviously damaging locally. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And sorry, because we have to be quick. You outlined a community meeting is going to be taking place in White City tomorrow. I just wondered if there's any further such plans, meetings for the rest of the borough. If you could shed any light on that.
Yeah, there is a promise that I was going to make tomorrow, but I'm happy to make it today as well. That we will hold at least quarterly these events. They will be an opportunity for the public to engage in a different way, to have sort of conversations in a different way. There are existing infrastructures in place, ward panels and such things, which obviously our police officers attend. But we will have so the larger public consultations quarterly, where either myself or possibly my deputy, Chief Inspector Tom Orchard, will attend and hold a conversation in as open a way as possible. So yes, they will occur across the borough.
Is it a quick follow-up?
And just one more question on the new Met for London plan. It says in the report that based on what we know now, we estimate the initial indicative costs of delivering a new Met for London will be approximately £366 million through 2023-2024 and 2024-2025. Now, the plan outlines the desperate need for extra funding to the tune of, as I said, £366 million. This is inclusive of an additional £52.3 million a year, which the Mayor of London has made available through an increase in the precept and additional business rates. Have you received any notification or indication on when further funding needed will be received?
Briefly, if you may, Superintendent.
No.
That was very brief. Thank you very much. And with that conclusive answer, thank you. And thank you, Councillor. We move on to contributions from the public. As I mentioned, we invited a number of local organizations working with communities that need the police more than anyone. We asked them to come to us with a maximum of 5 minutes to give some evidence on their experience with the police, the suggestions for what the police should improve, how it should improve it, and especially what we should be doing locally to make sure that the police is responsive, transparent, and open. The way for us to do this, if you'd like to raise your hand, I will start first calling on the invited organizations before moving on to the residents. You'll have 5 minutes. We'll have a roving mic that will come to you through the magic of one of our officers, or you can also use the table if you want to have papers. I will be strict. I will be asking you to stick to 5 minutes. Feel free to ask the police questions directly, or feel free to just make your comments. It's entirely up to you. So if I can invite anyone who wants to contribute. Yes, the lady, and Shad, if you want to prepare for next. Tony, as I said, we'll first hear from the organizations that we've invited, and of course we'll hear from residents as well. Yes, yeah, please. Is there a mic ready? And if you can please say your name and any organization or any other identifying factor. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Faika, but I'm a resident. I live on the Uxbridge Road, close to Askew Road. I'm not a public speaker, so please bear with me. But basically, I do find the police racist, and I do feel that there's no duty of care for women. I myself, I live in a shared block, street property on Uxbridge Road. I've been attacked twice by two of the neighbours below, basement flat and the ground floor. I've been attacked by them. They're, in a witch hunt, cahooting, and I feel like there's no urgency by the police. You ring the police and they turn up 3 days later. What good is that? My son, he's 13 now. He's terrified. So what I wanted to say is I don't have any faith in the police. And, as far as I'm concerned, we've been to many of these meetings and it's just all words. You come out with your statistics, but to be honest, A lot of people don't report it anymore because it goes nowhere. We're encouraged to report crime by the police for their stats, but it's going nowhere. You know, you make complaints and it's dealt with by the internal organization, you know, and let me finish off. What else have I got to say? There's no presence of the police on the streets, as far as I'm concerned. I don't see any police. I have to rely on my local community on Uxbridge Road to feel safe. I have neighbours, members of the community who say to me, if these neighbours give you any problems, ring me. So basically the public are being, you know, vigilantes or whatever you call them. And I agree with Councillor Trey that you know, you say that you're changing with this latest thing with the lady with the oyster. We're not telling you to comment on it, but this should be all training. You know, your officers should be trained straight away. You know, and that's not happening. And also, if you're having meetings, why? I mean, look, this should be attended by a lot more people. Why are these not advertised? The one in White City, where have you advertised it? Because I've not heard of it. I think that's it really.
If you'd like to come in on that. Oh,
Thank you, and very powerful speaker, and thank you for your comments. First of all, I'm sorry that you're not confident in calling us. We've got obviously something wrong in that, and we have to do something different. I would encourage people anywhere, if they have been a victim of crime, to tell us. It may not be possible for whatever reason, and there might be multiple reasons for it, to investigate that crime. But it isn't just about a statistic. At the end of every statistic is a victim. And my role is to protect you as best that I can. In relation to complaints, you raised the issue rightly that many complaints are dealt with internally. I would encourage you, if you feel you wish to complain to external or through an external body, the Independent Office of Police Complaints, IOPC, has an online service for police complaints. They are an external body. They are nothing to do with police. And you can make your comments to them and they will assess the severity of it and assign and monitor the progress of your complaint. I would also sort of finally say that in relation to reporting crime, the way that we often police is based on reported incidents. So we, for example, a hotspot of policing and our sort of response to that in terms of visibility often depends on how many reported incidents we are getting in that area, be that antisocial behaviour or more significant offences. We do that on a sort of fortnightly basis and sometimes a daily basis, depending on the reported incidents. But it's really important that people tell us what's happening. We have local officers that can deal with problem solving. If you don't feel that they are doing it, you know, I'm responsible for that, so I can review that, and I take that very, very seriously. And I'm aware of some of the issues, not probably all of them from what you've said, but some of the issues along the Uxbridge Road. And I'm going to ask some of my colleagues to make comments, as I think someone's making some notes here. But it's really important that people come forward. It's really important that we know what's happening, because unless we know, we can't respond. And it becomes a vicious cycle. So I am sorry personally that you've been let down. I want to give you my reassurance that from my perspective as a senior officer in the Metropolitan Police, I am pushing very hard for the best possible service. And your final point that you raised was around training immediately. I used to work in that area. For 5 years, I worked in Croydon. And I can tell you that the local community in that area, within 50 yards of that location of where that where that incident took place, are involved in local police training because I instigated that and they're still doing it. So we are involved, and the community are involved in training. And I know that the chief superintendent that responded that night on the television, he attends those meetings with those communities every single Friday. And his colleagues, PCs, sergeants, chief inspectors and others also do that. Because again, that's a meeting structure that I instigated in that community. If there's space to do that in the Uxbridge Road, I'll commit to that. I will meet the community in the Uxbridge Road. I'm happy to do street briefings or something similar for people to talk to me about what's happening and try and start a process to resolve some of them.
You haven't really answered the question. I mean, what have you put in place for women? If we ring and it's an emergency, why does it take you 3 days to come to us? Why are we not on the top of the pecking order? Because you're not showing any duty of care to us. We're women. We need to be on the pecking order, the top.
So to answer that question, it's a multifaceted answer, but I'll be as brief as I can. Violence against women and girls is now a national priority for policing. In the same way that terrorism is, violence against women and girls is a national priority. There is a document that's now set out on a yearly basis that talks about where those violence hotspots are. The Commissioner and everybody in the organisation has said that violence against women and girls is a priority for London. And we will do everything we can to improve the processes and the systems and the services we provide to women and girls in society and in London. We probably haven't got that right. I think that's fair to say at the moment. The Casey report has made that clear, and I absolutely acknowledge that. We haven't got that right. We need to do a lot more. The Commissioner has promised 565 more specialist investigators to deal with some of the issues that you talk about, violence against women and girls. And we're trying to improve the front line to give better visibility and a better response. We're also doing a massive amount, and we're spending millions of pounds in our contact centre so that we can answer calls more quickly and respond more quickly. We're also making lots of decisions at the national level now about what we are not going to respond to, so that the things that are important to us, violence against women and girls being one of the critical things, we respond to more effectively. We haven't got it right yet. Absolutely acknowledge that, madam. And we need to do more. And hopefully you'll give us the opportunity to do that and have a conversation together in a future date.
Well, I mean, at the
Thank
moment,
you.
it's a
Sorry,
shambles.
I'm afraid we'll
very,
have
very
to.
quickly, at the moment, it's a shambles. The Hammersmith and Fulham is shambles. It needs to be looked at again. And whoever's running it is not running it, doing a good job. You know, PC, we need to have more people on the street, on the beat. You don't see them. I mean, the enforcement officers, the Hammersmith and Fulham Borough, that's another story for another day. But if we talk about, you know, your officers, there's nobody on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Shad, I think you were next, and then Sarah. No, Shad, if you want to come in, and then Sarah. Just very quickly.
Just very briefly, I think, as Craig said, well done for speaking out, and this isn't an easy forum to do that. So, and I guess it is very disappointing. We are passionate people. We are members of society ourselves when we hear those types of stories, and hopefully things will change. I don't think we're here to say we're going to change tonight, tomorrow. This is all about listening to the communities, listening to yourself. I guess I would always say to people, just if you put yourselves in our shoes as police officers and as a part of the civil society, it's the way we task, where we put our police officers, the way that we, you know, look at where the assets are, the way that we ask as core taskings of all of our uniform officers that aren't on every street like they maybe used to be, but that relies upon the reported crime, and it also relies upon the intelligence and the community intelligence. So I guess we're not going to change that overnight about instilling in you that confidence to phone the police that you get the service that you deserve. And clearly with the resources that we've got, the call centres have to triage those for emergencies through to obviously, and that's a subjective thing, because obviously that is something hugely important to you. But my, I guess, plea or almost a sort of advice would be, if you don't feel the courage to report it, if there are crimes, if you phone Crime Stoppers, if you tell council members, that information, that intelligence comes back. And each week, each month, we meet and we decide and we listen, and the intelligence directors, we're an intelligence-led organisation. So if that incident was escalated, that could become a task, and so all of our assets would have to drive past that area to hopefully plug that gap that you don't have a uniform asset.
Thank you. This, yeah,
so
if we can move on.
I'm happy to pick up on that.
I'm Shad, I'm from SOBUS, which is the infrastructure organization for the community voluntary sector. So I can just concur with all, because I've got a friend in White City who went through DV, domestic violence. It's called the police, and they took their time. By the time the police officer turned up, and there was no follow-up or empathy. I think that's the kind of thing that a lot of women are reporting back. I wanted to, we're in touch with a lot of organizations and community who support communities, and that's the feedback to an extent where people, has been said, don't bother reporting small crime. And I think that's the start of, police force not being seen as supporting or protecting the community. I think that's something that is common. But the other thing I want to raise, I don't know whether this is something you can answer, is the police withdrawing from mental health incidents where people are, we've heard that the police are going to withdraw from kind of being called out where mental health issues are involved. Now, I think this is a particular issue because we as an organization are working and engaging with mental health. And we did a research report a couple of years ago on the ethnic minority mental health landscape. And I was personally involved in starting a Black mental health project 30 years ago in this borough. And the police then approached us to say, can we work together? Because we are finding it difficult, that I don't think it's our role fully to kind of just section people. Because at the time, 80% of the acute admissions at St. Bernard's were young Black men. And the situation hasn't changed much. And so I find it really appalling that the police are withdrawing from involvement in mental health, because I think we need to work together, look at new models rather than just withdrawing. It seems we can't do this with withdrawing. So it's seen the police is kind of going back to the station and engaging with the community less. I think this is the kind of trend that's been going on for a number of years. And therefore you don't feel that the police are there to protect you. And ethnic minorities particularly feel that, that the police are not their friends or not there to support them. So it's kind of not bothering. And what the lady said is concerning, that, vigilante mentality develops, that you settle scores yourself, you deal with this in the community level, and that is wrong. The police are there for that role.
Thank you, Shad. If you could give us an answer.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for that. There's a lot in there, but I'll focus, if I may, on the right care, right people, the mental health issue. So there's a national framework you may have seen in the media that's been supported by government and signed off today. That talks about an incremental change. So it's not simply walking away from mental health crises. That's not what we're doing. It's beginning to recognize the really important aspect of training and capability. Police officers are not mental health experts. We're just not. And the Mental Health Act powers, both section 135 and 136, are utilised in London around about 600 times a month. Every time that we do that, we take a person into care, protective custody in effect. It is taking us 10+ hours on average to hand over that person to somebody trained and more effective in dealing with the care of that individual. That cannot be right. Those 2 officers normally, because it normally takes 2 officers, so that's 20 operational hours that those officers could be out on the street, visible in Uxbridge Road and elsewhere. If we're talking about the operational cost policing for that, you're talking about something in the region of 120,000 hours per year that is potential saving. That's equivalent of hundreds of police officers more on the streets, because we're not waiting in A&E or in acute care wards to hand over a person that needs acute care. What has been said throughout is this concept of right care for the right people. If I have a leak in my bath, I'm not going to call an electrician. I want the right person to care for me and to deal with that issue. And that's why government, health services and others have agreed to this. This conversation has been going on for some years. And they've agreed that there will be a staged process to allow the police to concentrate and focus on crime, antisocial behaviour, and the things we have dedicated powers to do. but we will not, under any circumstances, and this has been made really clear, I hope, by the Commissioner and others, where there is a crime committed or a life in danger, we will never not respond to that. And that is really important. We're not going to simply walk away. This is about ensuring that the right people care for those most in need in our communities. And I think that's a really important point, and something which, you know, we want to work in partnership. And I know the Commissioner has stated, I think the 1st of September was a date, a sort of a cut-off date. This isn't simply walking away on the 1st of September. This will be an incremental change. We are going through the training of our staff now. We are going through the processes and talking to health and others to ensure that the processes are in place to make that happen. I hope that answers the question.
Can I assist with the question around domestic
I'll be very
abuse?
brief, and in the future, if I can ask the police to make the answers, I know it's important to answer them, but brief, and also if one of you can focus on answering. Thank you.
I'll do this very brief for you. I'm really disappointed to hear about your DA response or your neighbour's DA response. In regards to what we're doing on the borough at the moment in time, the extra 565 staff that are coming through, a number of those are going to resource the community safety units. At the moment in time, what you discussed was the frontline policing response. It usually comes to us secondary after that response, but what we're trying to do at the moment is put some training across the frontline policing to make sure that initial response is a lot better. And on a daily basis, we are going through the crime reports to see where there are outstanding actions through our CAD incidents that come in, so that we can put those safeguarding methods in place. And we're actually linked in, I believe yesterday we had the ball, which the partners within this, within Hammersmith and Fulham would have attended, where we can put those training not just across our partners, but also to our frontline and our secondary investigation police. So apologies for that response, but we are working on that, and we do know it's an area we need to improve on.
Thank you. And I'm sure it's an area that in future meetings we'll keep asking you questions about. It is something of great importance for us as a council and for the residents. Sarah, I think you were, can we have the microphone, please?
Thank you. I work for an organisation called People Arise Now. My name is Sarah Longuer. I'm the operations manager there. We were involved in the Casey review. We met with Baroness Casey with regard to our work in Sutton. So sorry, it's not a Hammersmith and Fulham example, but there's 3 things I did want to just briefly talk about. I think we were one of the rare organisations that were able to offer a positive example of working with the police. We, through a community connect project, a monthly meeting with residents and everything, a young person raised a stop and search issue and feeling very discriminated against, so upset actually that he couldn't speak, his father spoke. And through the conversation we had with, at that time with a police officer there, we started thinking about the question, how can we stop othering each other? How can the young people stop othering the police? How can the police stop othering the young people? And we came up with a project for the football tournament initially, where the young people played against the police. But as we've developed it now, and working with the yachts, the youth offending team there and the police, and we've developed a program where the police and the young boys meet monthly, develop a real relationship. And we believe that as you develop real relationship, discrimination and other things kind of start to fall away, to really get to know the individuals. So that's going well, and I've already spoken to you about this, Superintendent Craig Knight, and just probably looking for funding so we can replicate that here. But that was one of the things that we were doing there. But in terms of our work in Hammersmith and Fulham, we work with some very, very vulnerable individuals that are known to the GVEU. And with that work, which is much more intensive, much more individualistic, and much more vulnerable, we've found that there is complete distrust with their family members. And I can explain it in the following ways. The mothers in particular have said these things. They said that their children were groomed at a young age, maybe 12, 13, 14, at the school gates. This was a common theme. And then the kids would stop, they start bunking, start taking time off school. they'd start coming home with bruises all over their body because they were being beaten. They were clearly victims at this point. And the mother said that they completely worked with the police and the GVEU. They would send them texts that they would find on their sons' phones. They would send pictures of where their sons were, particular locations where they were, shops, houses, where they would see lots of young people coming in and out, and clearly there was a lot of illegal activity going there. But where they got, my thing stopped working, where they got discouraged is that they felt that the police would take that information and start building a case against their sons instead of the underlying perpetrators, the older men who were grooming them. They've had their sons go to, and we know it's a very complex case. We know that the victim then turned perpetrator. It's a very complex case. But where they have done everything that they were asked to do, and you mentioned at the beginning, you know, engage, talk to us, this is exactly what they did. And they saw their boys go to youth offenders team and institutions, and where the older grooming men carried on in their houses, in their shops. They saw it. They live in the communities. They would see this day in, day out. And in particular communities which are very close knit, this spreads like wildfire. And so then there becomes a distrust of the police, there becomes a distrust of the GVEU, and they're reaching out to voluntary organisations like ourselves. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is we've worked with other young people who felt that they've been radicalised by the police, where because of intelligence that may have happened years ago, or somebody's been accused of something and something's been written down in their file, the police knock on their door again and again, stop them wherever they are. And the same thing that they say is misinformation, and I don't know, I haven't seen the police files, but they say is just completely wrong, gets brought up again and again, and the police have built up this picture of the individual just because of what is written, which they completely dispute. These are complex things, and I'd be interested in just further conversations of how we can rebuild trust in those communities. And I did want to touch lastly on mental health. So some of these young boys that have been inside and been through the being victimized, term perpetrators, when we speak to them, sometimes they're just not there. There's been so much that is going on in their head. They've seen too much. They've seen too much, and they feel like their lives are over at 22, 23. They've given up. And so in terms of the GVEU, I know the police don't have capacity to, you know, you're not counsellors and don't have those qualifications, but I think at least within the GVEU, there should be some sort of counselling facility. If there isn't already, I'm not too sure, or they should be working with counsellors, because these are young people that are just, their minds are in some cases just gone. They can't focus. They distrust everyone. They're completely paranoid. Gang life makes you paranoid in itself, but they're just paranoid, and they really do need help. So those are the points I wanted to raise.
Thank you, Sarah. A response from someone from the police?
Okay, for myself, I'll pass over to Scott afterwards because I know you have a bit of a response as well. I think at the beginning of this, I mentioned the child sexual exploitation teams. Part of that remit is also the child criminal exploitation, and then it sits across the integrated gangs unit where we look at county lines. So I know it crosses all those areas. There's a big review going on at the moment in time. I've obviously just recently started on the BCU, and part of this Operation Person that we put in place, although that looks at thefts, we're looking at the wider picture of exploitation, and we were building up the intelligence picture across the AW. And in addition to that, as an example, we potentially have intelligence of boys being exploited in for that theft, but in different demographics. And we're trying to look at what that intelligence picture looks at to make sure that we can speak with them, get the information we need, and target those offenders and get the charities and everybody else involved. My missing persons team and the child sexual exploitation teams work quite close together, because when missing persons are found, and quite often they will be in that demographic, they go missing because of what they're involved with, my teams will go out and do those debriefs. And as part of that debriefs, they should be putting those child exploitation crime reports on, which my team will then take hold of. So we will start looking at the bigger picture of how we can help them. We work with a lot of specialist crime. One of those is Operation Watchy, whereby we may well have children that have gone missing that we believed are involved in either county lines or they've been exploited or groomed, and we will go and find them and bring them in. And if we can't deal with them for any, if we can't deal with the perpetrators for any offences because we haven't got that information from the boys that we have brought to us, then we see what other safeguardings we can put in place, and then we build that intelligence picture bigger so we can start targeting those suspects. I will move across to my colleague Scott because he's been working in the county lines for a while, but there is a lot more work to be done and we are trying to pull that together at the moment.
Thanks, Anne. I'm just mindful there's probably a lot of people online thinking, what's GVEU? So the Gangs Violence Exploitation Unit I've referred to as the Integrated Gangs Unit. I mentioned that at the outset that we're one of only 3 PCUs in the Met that have a council-funded Integrated Gangs Unit. I guess on a weekly basis, I'm copied into emails that come mainly from Neil Gemma and her team, which is around the kind of diversion successes that fusion, that integrated approach has. I've joined on a couple of days the peer outreach workers and Gemma and her team, and just been quite, I guess it's always an eye-opener to go and speak to some young people just to see the challenges that they have. Vast majority are obviously living in at sort of looked after accommodation. I guess when you look at the kind of adverse childhood experiences, this is a whole societal challenge for young people becoming the next person that's groomed at the school gates or off-rolled at school. I'd quite like to pick up with you offline, because obviously it's the first opportunity to sort of hear this, just to see if there's any learning for us. I'm aware of certain, let's call them operations, but initiatives. I guess there's the softer term, which is engaging with the mothers themselves. It's a very complex thing. We often problem solve where, unfortunately, the person has committed an offence and there's law there. How we actually deal with them, I think in the evolution of policing, we're much more akin to looking at them not only as a suspect, but they are a victim of that crime. There's various things that policy legislation have enabled us to treat that person as a victim. I guess it's disappointing to know that the mothers, particularly in certain communities, feel that actually they would stop giving that information. So I'd want to improve and stop that, because that's key. And a lot of the time when I worked in the mayor's office, I think the mayor's report, 58% of young people said they don't trust the police. They wouldn't report to police. I think something shocking, like 70% said they wouldn't go to a hospital if they got stabbed because they didn't have the trust in the hospitals not speaking to the police. So there's some big challenges for us all. I think having the integrated gangs unit enables us to do what we can working with the community, and that's the peer outreach workers. And we are co-located in King Street in the offices. So I think the opportunities there, I guess I would just want to encourage you to feed that back so that we can pick that up and then, you know, hopefully improve that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And having worked with People Arise now, actually seen their work rather than work with them, they do amazing work. And what Sarah raised about how they're trying to raise funding for outreach events, it would be great if you could work together so that it wasn't necessary for them to raise the funding, and the police themselves perhaps could be looking at organizing these events in obviously cooperation with organizations like the ones we have here. So if you could pick up with Sarah and People Arise Now and the other organizations to look into holding such events, I think that would be beneficial for everyone. Sharon, I think you had your hand up and evidence. Can we have the microphone there? No, sorry, Tony. As I said, we've had some organizations that we've asked to prepare evidence. We'll hear from them first. And as soon as we have time, of course, we'll move on to you. That's why we're trying to move on. Sharon.
All right, I'll be quick. Sorry, my voice sounds like Marge Simpson because I'm still recovering. So please bear with me. I too work at Sobers, but I'm also a chair alongside Tony here of our local Safer Neighborhood panel. The very first thing I'm going to say to you, you can see I'm clearly African Caribbean, and every element of the case review is a trigger for me because I have seen, been a victim of it myself, and the community I live amongst. It's a default position we all hold, unfortunately, a mistrust with the police. I work with older men that are from the African Caribbean community, particularly who are living with the trauma of having gone through the 70s and the 80s and the SUS law. I can't tell you the experiences, it's just been negative. So the mental ill health that runs through the community is real. It is not made up. It's not a lot of people are being woke. It really is real for the community. And I have to concur with everything that Sarah has said, because I, as a chair and also of the community, is about trusting and building relationships. I have to first give the local authority credit for introducing the gangs violence unit, because prior to the introduction, I was picking up on the ground as a community organizer, a lot of those challenges those young people coming up with, and things that the young lady said at the front about women as well. So I brought that back as intelligence and we started working together. In terms of currently, and I'm grateful to be part of the Safe Neighborhood panel and the team of Safe Neighborhood paneling. The experience, I'll be very honest with you today, fast forward, has been fairly positive for me in that the community don't know much about the police structure. One thing I spend my time explaining is that when I was with, the community don't know the difference between a response team and a neighborhood teams, the type of dialogue that they interact with. If people have that basic intelligence, it will help them to frame their thoughts around how to interact with the police. That's number one. Number two, I had a strange situation last week. I think it was when we had an NPP meeting. I had the police at my door because of my neighbor. I'm preparing a presentation to present to the police, the neighborhood panel, the same day. My point is, it was a response team to a domestic abuse. That's another thing I'm seeing a lot of. While I'm there preparing my presentation for the NPP, sorry, NPP is a neighborhood police panel, of which a lot of chairs of the 21 wards attend, and Sarah is our chair. Long story short, because I know time is against you, there is so much to say. We've got ideas around resolutions. Some ideas I've already input into the Fulham meeting we had in Fulham. Things around mental ill health, range of trainings that could be offered to the police. I know capacity is a difficulty, but part of it for me is the interaction with the police. When you first meet the member of the public, that is something we need to do some work on. Yes, you're right about the young people, Sarah, not trusting the officers and the police, and I have that. But people like me spend a lot of time talking to the community around about looking at the structure, having a better understanding, and sometimes as an intermediary between myself and the communities with the police. We had a meeting, a wonderful meeting last night with our local residents. It was standing room only. I've got to thank Councillor Ben Coleman for facilitating that meeting. We worked together and we had our sergeant present at the meeting. He was aghast at the amount of people and the things that were said. My point is about building trust in the community. I worked really hard along with others to do that and speak really at the grassroots level. We'll pull that intelligence together and help people to formulate and be empowered enough to bring it upwards into the structured system. So my point is, I guess, is some raising awareness around basic information about who the police are, what sort of structures, lessen the fear around how we communicate. But also back to what Sarah said, it's very rare I have a positive thing to say, but my experience has been positive, even for my poor adult son, who when he was younger was followed by the police 3 times. And the 3rd time he said he was walking, and then he said, Mom, they started walking faster, then they started running, and I started running, and we were running together and breathless at the end. And when they put, oh, we are the police. You know what my son said? Oh my God, I'm so glad you're the police. I thought you were muggers. But my point is, he was really, really grateful. But it's about how I raise my child. One thing I will leave with all of you here today, as a Black mother, I have to have a conversation that most white mothers don't have with their children, but we do. It is a default position we have to take. And can you imagine what the impact it has on my son? I have to work really hard as a mother to show him the positive side of life and the natural things he's entitled to integrate within society without being judged. He done said to me the other day, Mummy, I don't think I'll be able to get to that dizzy heights of a professional career, because I think I'm going to be blocked at a certain ceiling, because people look at him and expect him to be a certain way. And he's a physically fit, handsome son. Yes, he's my baby. Physically fit, tall young man. But my point is, he's mentally, like a lot of the young black men, don't trust systems and don't think the system will look, and being male as well. I have to work hard, and his father, my ex-husband, we all work hard. We've brought him up with a lot of love in the community so that he knows that there's some level of trust somewhere in the system. I'm just going to end that way because I could go on all night. And by the way, I dealt with the National Front when I was younger. So nothing fears. I have no fear, and I'm ready to take on anything with regards to social justice. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was very inspirational. If I can ask, also, a question based on Sharon's comments. It's clear, two things are clear, that there seems to be a plethora of formal structures for perhaps people to get involved. Maybe you can tell us what these are exactly, ideally without many acronyms, which are always confusing for people. But also they don't seem to be, people do not seem to be aware how they can get involved in these formal structures. And sometimes we find, and from what I understood from what Sharon said, that it's perhaps the people who would most benefit from being involved in these structures that are not there. I know for one, the S&T ward panels that Sharon mentioned, if you could just tell us, what's available out there, and also what will be done, what can be done, and what will be done to make them more representative of the community, if you find that they're not.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Sharon. From my perspective, it's really important that local people at every level have a voice in policing, and ward panels are one of the ways that they can do that. They are local in terms of there should be one representative for every ward that exists in London. Sometimes they're amalgamated, so sometimes you have to sort of change this boundary slightly, but that's done for good reason normally. And the idea is to have a say in very local policing. So normally it's the sergeant or PC that attends, or the PCSO if they're not available, and they talk to the local community, get local priorities and deal with those local priorities. And then return in 3 months time and say what they've done about those local priorities. And they can be anything that matters. And it's really important. If people want to have a say, they can do it at those panels. If they don't want to do that, there are other ways of doing it. You can write to us, you can go online, you can, there are sort of feedback mechanisms directly on the Met Police website. There are other advocacy schemes and volunteering schemes you can do. You can become a special constable if you wish, and become a police officer volunteer. There's lots and lots that you can do. And ultimately, of course, we are actively recruiting PCSOs and police officers, and particularly if we can from ethnic minority backgrounds, to better represent London, because London is an incredibly diverse city, and the policing of London currently, from our perspective, isn't as diverse, and we have to respond to that. And Sharon's points are really well made, and she's an excellent public speaker. Thank you for those comments.
Thank you for your response. I understand your point about there being other ways for people to get involved, but it seems to me that S&T ward panels are a really important one, which seems to be underused, and some of the people are not aware of, although they may be aware of, ways to send representations. So my question is, will the police, as part of, the change they'll be making, into the service they offer, will they be focusing on S&T ward panels and how they can be used to become more representative, to become more, the focus of the community, so that, meetings like this one will not necessarily be possible, because we'll all have them in our wards every 2-3 months.
So the structure is there. I obviously want to encourage everybody that represents or sits on a ward, wherever they may sit, to be part of having a say. So ward panels will be part of that process. The quarterly meetings that I'm starting tomorrow will be the second part of that process. They'll be sort of rotated around the borough for the public to come forward as they see fit. And obviously we want to ensure that there's online mechanisms and other ways that people can do it to ensure that feedback from everybody is listened to. Finally, your point about young people, because ward panels aren't representative necessarily, not just of particular communities, but particular demographics as well. And we're working really hard to engage with young people. I was at the Phoenix Academy 2 weeks ago doing a podcast with 14 young Black men and women, sort of having a conversation about policing. It was really eye-opening because we shared stories, we shared a conversation, and a really meaningful one. And the feedback from me and the feedback from the school and those young people was outstanding. And I've used that to talk to my staff about their feelings about their community. So yeah, when we have these conversations, they are meaningful and they do add value.
Thank you. I think this is a point we'll come back to. Do we have any other organizations invite that prepared evidence? Yes, yes, please. They're over there, Tony, and over
Thank
there
you.
as well.
My name is Nikki Scordy. I'm the Chief Exec of Advance, Domestic Abuse Specialist Charity. Advance, in fact, was set up in partnership with the police and the local authority in Hammersmith and Fulham in 1998. So I know a number of you have talked about working here. It was the first time that the idea of a coordinated community response was brought to the UK. And I think Hammersmith and Fulham as a local authority has a lot to be proud of, because that was introducing into the UK a concept that had not existed. So the ITVA model, the Independent Domestic Abuse Violence, Domestic Violence Advocate, was developed by Advance in this local authority. And so was the MARAC model that then was taken nationally. So this local authority for 25 years now, it's our anniversary, has a lot to celebrate. At the same time, thank you to Councillor Harvey and Councillor Upthorpe, because they highlight the fact that domestic violence in particular in this local authority is still a major issue. It represents over 50% of all crimes against a person, which is the main category, until domestic abuse became a crime itself, which was not I think it was 2 years ago that domestic abuse became a crime. So up until that time, it wasn't even recognized. I'm making the points to say that we have a lot to celebrate in terms of partnership and the way that we work in this local authority. At the same time, when we first started this, the baseline for, I believe it was Fulham Police at the time, would have about 1,000 domestic abuse incidents reported, and only 55 in 96 were charged, prosecuted, so that less than 5%. If we look at this year's statistics, we're just about 6% prosecuted, or just over 7%. And that's a national picture. It's not unique to Hammersmith and Fulham. The other point I would like to say is that it got better. In 2018, we were about 15% of prosecution. So we have slipped backwards. So that's disappointing. And that's a result of actually women and girls have believed the message and the call to report to the police. So reports have gone up by about 40+% in London and nationally of domestic abuse crimes. So as you were saying, women are believing the call to report, and they are reporting, but prosecutions have gone down nationally by 36% at the same time. So there is statistics are not on our side, and the case review has highlighted that, but they are not on our side. I'm also a resident, and I can give you the story of a woman who lives on my street, who for 23 years reported to us. So I take our failings as much as our partners in improving criminal justice responses to women. And for 23 years, she was not able to go through the prosecutions. Now, we might say it's because she was not ready. But the difference between her not reporting and her going through the criminal justice, being supported and actually achieving a conviction that has left her homeless because she's had to divorce and sell her house and move away from our borough, but still feels vindicated because after 23 years, somebody said the criminal justice system protected her in the right way. The reason she chose to do that was because we had a criminal justice ITVA that was allocated to her, because we have a specialist domestic abuse in this local authority that is the second in the country, and it's still one of the few remaining, and that we have some of the best responses, but we are not able to provide that to every resident, and certainly not to every woman and every child. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 5 children, and actually 1 in 6 men experience domestic abuse. So I would like to put to the council and to our colleagues in the police that we have a lot to be proud in this local authority, but we are not taking that in the step in the right direction. And actually our funding and our investment in that is being challenged. So I'd like to ask the question really from the Met Police, what target would you like to see in our local authority? What would success look like? And not just we're doing better, because we're all putting training together. I know we're contributing to that. We're doing a lot together. We have done for 5-6 years, much more intensely than we did before. I've been in my role for over 6 years now. So I do remember my first meeting to discuss our response together. And it was in 2018 when we were saying, oh, wow, we've achieved 2 coercive control prosecutions, remembering that coercive control became a crime in 2015. So it took us 3 years for 2 prosecutions. We have a lot of work to do together. I don't think it's just the Met. I don't think it's the local authority. We all have a lot of work to do together, but we're not consistent on it. We're not delivering the best service that we can, and we have a ways to go to do so. So plans and strategies are great for all of us, but how much progress do we really want to see, and what diversion of resources do we want to see? I'll just add one more thing. We do work with women who are criminalized. We've led on the diversion project in London with the PAC and the Met, and actually that is a success story for the 2 BCUs that we were delivering it since 2019. And yet we have 1 BCU that has come on board now. I believe is Central East, the Tower Hamlets and Hackney is coming on board, but we don't have it in this borough, and we're not seeing that adopted pan-London, despite the law of change that requires out-of-court disposals. We know women are criminalized much harsher than men, much faster for lower levels of crime. And the example of a woman arrested, people are shocked that women end up in prison for not paying a speeding fine or for not paying a TV license, but they do. And that's often because they are poor, because they're ones that answer the door, and because they are the lowest bread earners, and considered that they'll get a lighter sentence, but they don't. They end up in prison for these types of crimes. So we have a lot of solutions as to how to progress, but we're not adopting them fast enough, and we're not diverting resources enough. If women are 50% of the population, and if women are 20, I think 1 in 5 calls are domestic abuse calls in the Met, then I'd like to see 20% of our resources diverted to that. That's the kind of commitment. 100 offenders out of 95,000 incidents reported a year to the Met in London for domestic abuse. I'm sorry, but that's just not enough.
Thank you. Thank you. If you'd like to pick up on that comment, especially the one at the end, I think.
If I start with the 100 offenders, and then I'll go straight to my colleagues. Those 100 offenders are the top 100 in London. We have to start somewhere. Obviously, as we put those people into prisons and deal with them in whatever way we do, we'll move on to the next 100 and the next 100 and the next 100. Absolutely acknowledge that we need to do a lot more in relation to domestic abuse and the criminalisation of women in society, because you're absolutely right. Everything you said is spot on. And I'll go to my colleagues who are expert more than I.
And from my point of view, I don't want to give you targets or any aspirations, but to me, until we've stopped domestic abuse to women and to men, we haven't reached any of our goals. It should be eradicated, and it comes across culturally as well as by police working with our partners. In terms of resources and the 100 org, as pointed out, they are the first ones we're looking at in that Intel picture, and we will carry on from that. So it's a model we've got in place, but that's part of our high harm index. It looks across not only DA, but it looks across sexual offending as well. So it's your top high harm offenders, but we're still carrying on looking at the other offenders. And that's where we put these additional resources in place. So in terms of the extra 565 trained specialisms, they will sit not only across the community safety teams, but when I talk about the Sapphire teams, we know that rape within the domestic abuse world also sits within our Sapphire teams. So it's a big place where we're trying to put all those resources. I'm also, in terms of Marek, I know we have a DV or DA domestic abuse perpetrators panel, and I was on one of those perpetrator panel last week, where we are linked in, as you will rightfully know, through Marek, and we're on linked into our risk management unit, and I've got our predatory offender unit linked into that as well, to make sure that we're trying to safeguard our victims of domestic abuse, as well as take our perpetrators to court, and also having a lead on MAPA in terms of the jigsaw piece, all our top violent offenders. We are looking at referrals across both MAPA and MARIC, so we can manage them both, not just when we are looking to put them into the prison system, but also in release, so we can make sure that the orders are in place, non-molestation orders, as we know, but we're also looking at that stalking piece as well. So we know that, you know, we will have domestic suspects will also be involved in stalking, and we've got more resources coming into the stack, so that stalking team, so we can start looking at those additional court orders we can put in place. And then, as I said, through the MAPA. So there's a lot of work going on. We're not there. We've got more to do, and we've got more training to do, and I totally hear that.
Thank you. There was someone else you would like to speak? If you may, the microphone, please. No, the lady at the front.
I'll hand
Okay,
it to you.
thank you.
Over to you, Tony, afterwards. My name's Sarah Chambers. I'm the chair of the Independent Advisory Group to the Police of the Borough. I'm also a ward panel chair alongside Sharon, alongside Tony. And so I suppose I do spend quite a lot of time thinking about policing. I think that we're almost at the point now of needing a royal commission on policing. I don't know what other people think about that, but just generally as a society about what people think about policing and whether it's fit for 2023 for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years ahead. And I think a lot of policing has changed. People are really likely to be subject to things like fraud. I think that there's a lot of underfunding, that the police cannot talk about. They're politically impartial. But I think that as residents, we should be raising it with the Home Office, with the Treasury, etc. And a lot of the issues that boil down, not enough officers on the street, other issues, a lot of it is funding. And we really need to do something about it. We're not up to the levels of officers that there were. And I think it's up to us as residents to be lobbying for that. I think that's where there are very hard decisions to be made about where precious resources go. And I perceive that one of my roles is to encourage people to be realistic with what we ask the police to do, but also to be lobbying the politicians centrally that they need to give us more funding, because they do, to be honest. I'm really concerned about retention and recruitment. We have now got, I think it's something like 30% of officers in the Met will have less than 3 years experience, which is shocking. It really is. And I know it's very hard for officers to talk about this because they're not allowed to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it and say that one of the retention issues is obviously pay. Well, in fact, we have talked about it briefly before about officers going to food banks. Most officers cannot afford to live in London. They have long commutes to come into London, etc. I found out this afternoon that one of the best sergeants on the neighbourhoods team, that he's put in for a transfer out of the Met. I am so disappointed about that. The guy is fabulous. He is a really valuable officer in central Fulham. There's an officer who Craig mentioned the other day and said is one of the best officers in the borough, if not in the BCU. He's a safer neighbourhoods officer, and he is leaving London. Again, they're all leaving for financial reasons. So I'm really concerned about retention. There's a lot of focus on recruitment, but recruitment takes time, and we also need to focus on retention and even on recruitment. There's a young trainee detective who I know who attends all our IAG meetings, who approached us last September, sent me an email, said, I've been giving you your details. I come from Herefordshire. I don't know anything much about London, but I really want to get to know Hammersmith and Fulham in this BCU and to understand it. And I think that one of the things that will help me is if I come to IAG and other meetings. What a great approach. At the last meeting, he said that he is now applying for civil service jobs because he can't, because of his workload. It's not financial. The workload is extraordinary. So I'm very concerned about funding, whether we'll have the funding to keep the officers that we have, to get new officers in, funding, as Trey asked, you know, whether the funding will actually come into play in order for the Met to be able to deliver the new Met. I think it's something we will have to think about. We don't want to think about it, but we do.
Mr.
and I
Tempest,
guess-
if I may ask you to come to an end,
sorry,
just so they can get the
sorry.
police.
And just lastly, everybody is welcome to join a wall panel, and to join the IHE. These groups are not closed shops. They are representative, but we would love to have new people join us. We're always welcome. We really enjoy having the contributions from councillors who attend, from the law enforcement officers, from the community safety officers, and from the housing officers, because it's one of the best ways, and I think this borough is really good for it, or has been up until quite recently, that the council, the residents and the police work alongside each other, and we're like a triangle. And I hope that carries on for a very long time. But I don't know if there's any other way that we can help you to deliver what you need to deliver.
Our panel.
Very briefly for me, it's get involved. It's tell us what's going on. It's be involved in shaping the way that the Met is going to do business in the future. The Royal Commission question is probably a question for central government. I have a view, but it's probably not for this meeting. In terms of funding, I think stuff is being done. There is a recognition, but of course, every public sector service has suffered in the same way over the course of the last sort of 10, 14 years.
Yeah, I think it comes as no surprise that retention is a challenge in the public sector, just because obviously, I think as Craig pointed out at the start, what the last 10 years represents as far as the pay cuts that officers have had to experience. I think I try my bit to try and inspire some of the young in service officers, particularly those wearing the uniform. Last weekend or 2 weekends ago, when I was covering the BCU, there were 21 officers injured. One seriously, who I had to go and see in hospital with a bleed on his brain. These are people paid less than people starting in McDonald's. And I guess we have to just ask ourselves, you know, is it right that these officers obviously are running towards danger that are being paid less than someone that serves fast food? So that's a challenge. 66% of my staff are within 0 to 4 years service. So a lot of the meetings that I have with my leadership teams almost go back to the kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as in, are your staff happy? Do they need trauma support? Are they being fed? A number of my officers don't claim their pensions because they can't afford to live in London. So they don't have a future to look forward to, as maybe we on the panel do, as far as the civil service pension. So there are some big challenges, and I guess my ask, and everyone's asking here, is just to lobby those in power that have the purse strings to let them know, and what that looks like in the future if it carries on is obviously going to become more of an issue. But I guess it's incumbent on us as senior leaders to just try and inspire as best we can. But clearly, when it comes down to our own internal surveys, the Met survey and Pulse surveys, it's because we are not paying them sufficient, and they look across their friends, whether they're detectives that have come from university or just have joined from all walks of life. Then they say, am I really looking to expose myself to the risks to myself and their families? They want to go home safe, and they want to be paid to be able to live without claiming from food banks. So it is a challenge, and I'm glad you raised that. I think it's probably worse than we understand at the moment, and only time will tell.
Can I bring some positives in, please? I'll be
Very quickly, just a couple of sentences
I
only.
think I mentioned before, I brought in a new direct entry detective program from 2017. I know already people that have come through that program that are now detective sergeants. People are still contacting me who knew that I brought that out from Hendon, asking to actually become detectives. I think the resources is an issue as well as the funding. The more resources we get in, the less workloads they've got, and the more they're looking into it. So the training across the piece as well. And actually, letting them aspire to omnicompetent specialisms, moving them around so they don't think they're just going to get stuck in some place. I think loads of that training will assist. So actually I am hearing some real positives as well as some of the negatives. So we are trying to turn a corner, and with the more resources that do come in, that should help us.
Thank you, DCI. Can I call, are there any organizations that we've invited, they've prepared statements and would like to speak? In that case, I will open the floor to a couple of final questions from members of the public. I should stress that I'll always give priority to women, in particular, members from the BAME community. For obvious reasons, these were the findings of the case review. These are the voices that are not being heard. This is what these are the people we need to be listening from. Anyone with a quick final question? Sorry, because you've spoken, I've moved to someone else, but appreciate it. Very quickly, yeah, please, the microphone. No, there's a roving microphone, please, Tony. Tony, appreciate. So if you can move back and there will be a microphone for you.
I'm going to make an official complaint about the discrimination I'm experiencing from the leader of this committee, who knows that I represent an organization.
Tony, I'm sorry, it's getting late, and this is
so
out
Tony
of order
Boyes,
as well.
I'm Tony Boyes. I'm the chair of the Fulham Reach Safer Neighbourhood team, which is
Thank you, Tony.
Correctly pointed out, is the right place for members of the public to come to.
Yeah.
If you have a problem with the police, that's where you should go. So I'll get to the end. I'm going to take my full 5 minutes. Thank you, Councillor Souslos.
You're very welcome.
The end point of this is, the end point is everybody here, including people online, must take away an action to fix this problem. It's a crisis. I've had 2 of the members of my ward panel here who've taken all the time listening to too much talk. This lady was dead right. There's too much talk and not enough action. And I was thrilled to find out that Inspector Ware was out last night. That is exactly what we need. A lot of people here, members of the public, taking their own time to come here, and they need something done. We've had people knocked down and dogs killed on our footpath, not enough being done. We've had cars being broken into every day in my ward and not enough being done. And then I come here, and I think the public were expecting that we would see the police and the council united, telling us about what they're going to do to fix the problem. Instead of which, we've seen sort of like a conflictual gladiatorial. We've had 2 councillors go on and on about racism and sexism and every other ism that you can mention.
Tony,
that is not.
I would like.
I've not finished my 5.
Tony, I would please you.
I've not finished my 5 minutes. Are you here to listen to the public or not?
Please, we need to wrap up the meeting.
We have a big problem. We have a real crisis in my ward, as you know. You both know. I want you to do something
Tony,
about
because we know this is not. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is not the space to discuss this. This is the space to discuss. Sorry. If you can. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. What? Okay. Well. Sorry. Yes, you can. Yeah. Okay. Well, I apologize. I apologize for frightening you, but I do want everyone to do something.
Tony, if we may, Genevieve, thank you.
Thank you. No, you can stay. I'll tone it down if it offends you.
No, sorry, Tony, if I
Okay.
may ask you to please go back to your seat. We need to wrap up the meeting.
Okay, but so you've heard my point.
I heard your
is
point. Your point
We
is
need
heard.
more done and we need less talking.
Yeah.
And that's probably
Yeah.
a good point to finish.
Yeah. And that's, thank you. And that's what we're here for. And as I said at the beginning, we are here. We are here to work with the police, and we're here to make this one of a series of quarterly meetings. This is not, the end of the process. It's not a means to an end. This is the first of many meetings that we'll be having, where we'll be working with the police. If I may ask for some order as we bring the meeting to a close, please. If I may ask for some order as we bring the meeting to a close. Sorry, there's no microphone available, so if you can. No, so that people online can hear the comment as well.
Hello, yeah, I've just come here tonight. I've been just gone through PCSO sort of a recruitment process. I passed it. Unfortunately, I got some medical and I'm a victim of austerity. So my blood pressure is right high at the moment. It's probably anemia from self-diagnosis. But yeah, but I'm persevering with it anyway. And it's great to see everyone here tonight. And just, you know, it's a shame about the end where, you know, it's causing conflict. And that's what we don't want. We want people to be together because that's the only way that things are going to get done. And it's about a multi-agency approach. It's not just the police. The police can't do it. The council can't do it. The community can't do it. Everyone's got to do it together. And we got to draw people in together however we can, you know. And that's all I'd like to say, really. I mean, I had a few more things to say, but, you know, it's probably not time and place. But it's great to see this is happening. And, you know, it's just to go forward. If we can just go forward together and we can deal with our different issues on a micro level, you know, and that's the way they'll get dealt with, you know. But best of luck to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. And can I, of course, echo that we're here to work together, community, residents, police, the council, to make sure that something happens. As I mentioned, of course, the point is for actions to be made. We've already given some actions to the police, and we'll be holding these meetings quarterly, precisely so we can monitor the progress being made, or whenever the progress is not being made, to make sure that they are being held to account, and we can, you know, take it from there. I think there have been a lot of common threads that have come out tonight. Residents have complained that this hasn't always been the follow-up from the police. They're afraid to report crime, or they do not know how to report crime, or they just don't feel that crime, if it is reported, it will not be followed up on, as our first speaker said. I do find a bit perhaps worrying that the police at times will say that throw the burden back to the residents, that it is for them to report. We should be seeing more about how the police will be making sure that they will be proactive to make sure they have the intelligence, and we'll be talking to residents. I'm glad to hear about the meetings you'll be having across the borough starting tomorrow. But no, more needs to be done. It's also clear from what Sharon said, from what Ms. Chambers said, from what Tony also said, that there are structures in place, S&T wood panels. They do a good job. There are people there who speak up, but perhaps they could be doing more, or they could be doing something different, or perhaps residents again do not know how to find them or where to find them, and perhaps, you know, this is another action for the police, and maybe it's something, you know, that we could cover in an entire meeting in the future. What can we be doing to make sure that the residents are included in this process, that as we just heard, that everyone works together to make sure that this happens. It is something that definitely I would like to hear, along with other common threads. Shad mentioned mental health. It's something that worries all of us here. I don't know if there are any concluding comments from the police.
Very briefly from me, thank you this evening for coming in. Your messages are heard, your voices are being heard. We have a lot to do, and this is one step in that process. Yeah, from my perspective as a senior leader responsible for Hammersmith and Fulham, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and to work alongside you to do that. But I can't do it alone, as has been very eloquently said. So thank you for your time, and I'll continue to work alongside you as best I can.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. Thank you to our residents. Thank you to the panel. I think we'll bring it to a close. Our next meeting will be... Yeah, just...
First of all, I'd like to thank all the members of the public for coming along and sharing their stories. And second, I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to all of those who do work incredibly hard with the ward panels. They really are the grassroots getting up to the police. The police interact brilliantly with them. And I just wanted to reiterate my support and thanks to all those who are heavily involved in organising them. So thank you.
Thank you. I echo those comments. Thank you, Councillor Dinsmore. And we'll be here. Our next meeting is on the 22nd of November, followed by the 7th of February, 2024. Rest assured, we'll be here making sure we're bringing the community together and residents are safe. Thank you so much.